Good evening, and welcome to Superpower Broadcasting. I'm your host, Kevin Castley. Thank you for tuning in tonight. So we just wrapped up the stream talking about Jack Posobiec and his debate challenge posed to the neocons. And tonight, this is the original stream that we were going to be doing. So this is the second stream of the evening. And that is, of course, going to be the continuation of the discussion on Russia with the Politicrat that I did a couple weeks ago. Now, the Politicrat is a few minutes out still. However, we have some comments in the chat. I'll take a look at this and as we wait for the Politicrat to roll up. So he did say that he'll be here in a few minutes, though. So we can also continue the conversation in the chat from the stream that I just did. We were joined by Spooky Nookies near the end of that, so that was fun. But it was mostly me and Wyatt talking about Posobiec and some of the brainlet brigades and everything. So it was a good time. Hungry Country Ball is here. He says, "When do we get Outremer Part 3 or Outremer Kevin Part 3?" Well, that needs to be scheduled by the Politicrat. I haven't heard anything around that yet. Kremlin Cow says based. So we got KKK in the chat. Oh man. Get Weiss on. Yeah, well, Weiss. Okay, well, he's not the Politicrat though. This was just going to be a convo with the Politicrat. You know, we'll just wrap up that conversation that we were having a couple weeks ago about Russia. So let's see. Yeah, it's been a pretty active night tonight. You know, pretty busy, and we of course had a lot of the brainlet brigades. Of course, this is on the continuation, of course, of the anarchists and ANCAP and libertarians versus neocons and hawks Twitter war that's been going on, and then you got Jack Posobiec coming out. I'm just wondering who's next that's going to make one of these statements like, "I'll debate any neocon," but then have me blocked, because Jared Rabel did that. Jared Rabel straight up said, "I will debate any neocon," and I was blocked by him. And I found out, and I'm like, "Hey, look, I know I'm blocked. I accept your debate challenge." He unblocks me, replies to my acceptance of his debate challenge, and he says to me, "Well, I don't debate bad faith actors." And then he proceeds to block me again. Oh, in other words, I want to look tough, and I want to say I'll debate any neocon. But then in reality, when a neocon takes me up on that offer, I'll say, "Oh, but you're a bad faith actor. Therefore, I get to look tough and say I'll debate anybody, but they're all blocked to begin with." And by the way, the only reason why I even found out about that is that my followers were like, "Hey, look, you should probably say something about this," because of course I was blocked. And I appreciate that. You know, people will keep tabs on my opponents and everything, and even if I'm blocked by them. And they will, of course, bring to my attention these sorts of instances. But it makes them look really bad. At least it made Rabel look pathetically weak and cowardly. And I think a lot of people realized that he was full of it. And this sort of image of him as this tough guy was just, nah, it wasn't there. I think with Posobiec, though, I do agree with White. I do think that there's actually a chance he will debate. It's small. It's a small chance. He's either going to say bad faith actor or, "Oh, well, when I said any neocon, I really meant like Bill Kristol or David Frum." That would be funny. And we do a stream on it because I literally have the tweet. "Happy to debate any neocon anytime." Not big neocons, not famous neocons, any neocon. So let's go, Jack. Let's debate. Atheist Gone Wild asks, "How are you going to pay for it?" I'll debate you, Kevin. We're bad. Russia good. Yeah, let's debate this guy. By the way, Kyle doesn't really do debates. Even if I had 100 million subs, Kyle's not going to debate me. He only really debates people on social issues or economics. He doesn't debate hawks. He doesn't debate people on foreign policy, even though that's everything he ever talks about and gets paid hundreds of thousands of dollars a year to talk about. He can't debate on it It's pretty pathetic. So imagine that too. Like it's not even like, oh well, economics isn't my focus. I mostly do social issues, so I don't really want to debate on economics. It's like no, that's his forte. That's his specialty is foreign policy, and he doesn't want to debate about it. That's pretty sad. It's pretty sad. So. Well, spooky. That's right, spooky nookies. So yeah, I'm just gonna tweet out actually that we're live, so we'll get some more people in here for when the Politicrat rolls up, and let's go. So, but yeah, that was a fun stream with Wyatt and Reese. So, by the way, make sure you're subscribed if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet. I do daily streams and daily premieres. Today we're doing 2 streams and a premiere. So. We had the Pasobic stuff come up. That was pretty fun. So, and hopefully we'll get a debate out of this. You know, hopefully he will be a man of his word, come and debate me. So, I'm just going to tweet out that we're actually live right now. Well, I can never find Politicrat's Twitter handle, so I'm just going to say Politicrat without actually adding at him. Won't come up. That's unfortunate. Yeah, how's everybody doing this evening? Okay, so that's tweeted out. I'm also going to post this over on Minds and Gab. Are you guys on Minds or Gab, by the way? Okay, there we go. Yeah, I'm not sure how much. Oh, okay. He did just get back to me. He'll be another minute still. Okay. I'm good, bro. I sent Mr. Evans the pooter video. Yeah, that video, that short video that Arthur made is wow. It's crazy. It's wild. Wyatt's here. Downvoted. Oh man. I have an abandoned Minds account from like 4 years ago. I didn't even realize that Minds has been around that long. I thought it was a relatively new thing. I had never even heard of Minds until Wyatt told me about it. So, pill him on Iraq. Wait, who? Pasobic or Politicrat? Because we were just going to talk about Russia tonight. And like, by the way, we're not even talking about Russia in a modern context either. We're like, basically, Politicrat and I, we were having a conversation before they got into some stuff from over 100 years ago, and we didn't get to finish it. So this is going to be the conclusion of that conversation. So as far as Iraq goes, that's quite off topic. But if we're talking about Pasobic, well, he wants to debate neocons. We could debate Iraq. That'd be great. I'd be happy to debate Pasobic on Iraq. So absolutely. So Wyatt says, everyone like Kevin's stuff on Minds to mine Bitcoin tokens. So I actually have no idea how the monetization side of it works. Like, do you actually get Bitcoin for posting stuff on mines? Because that would be absolutely based if that were true. Because I like coins and stonks and all that kind of stuff. Because there is a wallet part of it, and it tells me my token balance. And like I have like a little over 2 tokens right now, but I don't actually know what that means. And how does that convert into Bitcoin? Huh. I can add my Bitcoin address. So my Bitcoin address, is that going to be my Coinbase address? Oh no. Actually, I think I know my Bitcoin address is actually in all the videos now because Jay hooked me up with that. Yeah, no, I do have a Bitcoin address. My I'll put it in the chat right now, so you can feel free to send me coin right there, so you can like do stonks and stuff. Yeah, so we added that to mines. There's actually a lot I need to do. I need to make the Facebook page for this channel look a lot more swaggy and stuff too. I updated some of the cover art and everything, and yet it didn't load properly for whatever reason. That's annoying. It still has the old generation superpower broadcasting aesthetics going on, which is, unfortunate. They look really cool still, but they don't look as sharp and crisp as the recent ones from Arthur. So try that again, actually. So yeah, for those of you joining right now, we're just waiting on the Politicrat. Once he gets here, we'll actually have the conversation. So this is the boring part, right? So thank you for bearing with me currently as we wait on the Politicrat. So I like getting drunks while getting Batonka stocks. Oh man, yeah. Okay. Side voted. Yeah, it's like thumbs sideways. So yeah, we've of course had the drama with the anarchists and everything, and the libertarians. News from that is we got a debate with one of these guys tomorrow night, Friday night, and we got a debate with one of these guys, Liberty Lockdown, on Tuesday. So 2 debates coming up there. Got another one in the works, probably going to happen on the weekend. We're going to look at that. We've of course got the second episode of Ghoul Gang Rising. That's going to happen Saturday night. That's the podcast featuring myself and my co-host, Reese of Spooky Nookies. So liking all your older mines posts. We will be mining to get ad tokens. Well, I'll check your DMs, Kevin. Okay, I'll go and check my DMs. Wow. That's beyond dumb. We've got Black Pill Mayor with a very dumb and cringe take. So we're going to bring this up on the screen. hopefully after we get through this, we'll have the Politicrat joining us. We have Cypher's Corner here. I absolutely loathe that my country has decided to blame all the political nonsense on Russia. Russians share the same feeling with me. What are you talking about? Russians have no power. Russians are, almost all of them, irrelevant to the Kremlin. The Kremlin is the elites, the oligarchs. I mean, the Kremlin and the oligarchs in Russia are the power players. They're the ones that speak for the country. Average Russians have really no say. It's a dictatorship. It's an oligopolist dictatorship. It's fascist Russia, right? So Russians share the same feeling with me. I actually agree with you. Average people want freedom and prosperity and everything. So that's why we support the United States. We support the West. We support intervention. We support getting tough on dictators. And big ones like Russia, you got to bankrupt them. Smaller ones, you got to liberate them. So, Badonka based. Good response. Very nice. I'm with you. I'm thinking. Keep up the good fight if it is what you mean it to be. Well, yeah, we're Hawks. We don't give up the good fight. So there you go. Yeah, Politicrat late. He'll probably arrange his funeral for one day and die 3 days after. Not to be mean, but you know it's true. But yeah, big meme. We got hearts from Cypher's Corner. So yeah, we'll bring up the tweet that Wyatt brought to my attention because it's pretty funny. Let's go and take a look at that. By the way, as far as the timeline, like how long are we going to wait? Well, we can talk about random stuff. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and the Cypher's Corner over there. Be sure you're subscribed over on YouTube, by the way. Like I stream to Twitch as a byproduct of my streaming to YouTube. I'm at heart a YouTuber. That's where you're going to see the whole gang, basically. Twitch has 10% the following that we got over on YouTube. So if you come over to YouTube, you can actually engage with the chat gang and everything. Not very many people over on Twitch for this channel yet. So that way you don't miss out on the conversation. This is the tweet that Wyatt brought to my attention. This is Black Pill Mayor. Maybe he was more of an imperialist Christian fascist. Bush's post 9/11 push for the global empire has been sold as patriotism and love of country rather than for what it is, a looting of liberty and property to benefit the political elites, unquote. And then, Lou Rockwell, with the brainlet there. And then I love Wyatt's response. No. Oh, yeah, they like to Mises.org. Oh, man. No, libertarians are insufferable, man. Libertarians are insufferable. They're a bunch of clowns. It's a circus with those guys. They're a bunch of goofy goofballs. Okay. Politicrat says he's getting set up now. Okay. So he'll be here shortly, hopefully. Yeah, fascism is not neoconservatism, and both of those are not National Socialism. Yep, that's a buzzword checklist. Yep, that's correct. Yeah, no, these guys are goofy. These guys are definitely goofy. So Yeah, libertarians in 1964, I will start a nuclear war. Libertarians now, war scary. Yeah. Oh, yeah, libertarians in theory, let's topple tyranny. Libertarians in practice, no, you can't hurt Saddam. That's his sovereignty, non-aggression principle. Yeah, no, they're a joke. They're a joke. Why it says National Socialism is Marxist, fascism is more socialist, syndicalist. Yeah, pretty accurate. And neoconservatism is pro-liberty and near perfect. Yep. There you go. There you go. Miss sovereignty. Okay, there's Politicrat. Okay. We welcome the Politicrat on the show tonight. We are here to continue the conversation that we kicked off on a previous stream a couple of weeks ago discussing Russia. And with that, we'll go over to the Politicrat. How's it going tonight?
It's going all right. Sorry I took so long. I was I kind of lost track of time, and then I decided to take a shower, and I thought I'd be done by like 3:30 my time, and then I was like, well, I'll just keep sending them messages saying I'm almost ready. So yeah.
Well, there you go. So yeah, I'll let you basically pick off from where we left off, and we can continue with the conversation. I don't really recall exactly where we got to in the previous one by the time we had to wrap it up, but feel free to just kind of
so more or less the whole purpose of last time, I wanted to sort of share a particular perspective of Russia, of the future of Russia specifically, where it's going to be on the world stage. Basically, it's quote unquote destiny, for the lack of a better word. According to predictions of this one history book from the early 20th century by a German historian by the name of Oswald Spengler, greatest history book ever written, Der Untergang des Abendlands. But either way, it's scarily accurate in all of its predictions it's made over the past 100 years. Predicted the world wars, predicted nuclear weapons, predicted just basically from just by going back and analyzing previous different trends that have occurred concurrently in different civilizations throughout history. So more or less, part of his, when he goes on and talks about Russia, part of what he tries to do is he spends a small part of the book more or less refuting the idea that Russia is a Western country, and is saying, no, Russia is its own infant civilization that's sort of like just in like it's in the not like just in its embryonic state, cultural stage, more or less, and it really only looks European on the surface because it's had all of these foreign culture forms and ideas and like aesthetics imposed upon it going back to Peter the Great. So that means the three contrasting positions on Russia with regards to its cultural identity would be, especially if you take a look at his from like the perspective of different historians. So you would have my general take, which is the one that he's trying to. Well, actually, I'm kind of a mixture of all of them. I'm not going to go into what I personally see it as, but you have like the mainstream. Russia, culturally Western. It's basically European. You have that position. Basically, that's what Peter the Great tried to do. And then you have the Spenglerian position, which is, well, no, Russia is its completely like own thing entirely. It's completely own world with its distinct kind of way of like outlook on things, political systems, artistic styles, but it's more or less being expressing itself outwardly using Western European culture forms because it really has no other way of expressing itself, again, due to the 200 years of patronization. So then that's the view that it's actually it's actually a completely distinct culture from that of Western Europe. And then there's the third view, which is that it's part of an Orthodox civilization left over from the Byzantines, which would be the view of people like Arnold Toynbee or Samuel Huntington, if you've ever read The Clash of Civilizations before. Fantastic book. Especially because you're really into foreign policy. It was basically a book that was written in response, referring to Clash of Civilizations. It was written as a response to Fukuyama's The End of History. So it's as a, I don't know. So that's one I definitely recommend for you, Clash of Civilizations. But either way, so with regards to his future predictions on Russia, he more or less said, and so mind you, Spengler wrote this in 1917, so right after the end of the First World War. He started writing it before the war even broke out, but by the time it was published, so published it exactly the year that Tsar Nicholas was overthrown, the Russian Revolution, the rising of the USSR. But so more or less his whole thing is, so just kind of like how Western civilization as we know it now more or less began around the time of Charlemagne, and then you had the barbarian tribes that sort of coalesced, and then they kind of evolved over time and built like these early medieval kingdoms, and then that's the basis of that which we now call the West, which is rooted, of course, mixture of Christianity and Greco-Roman metaphysics as a foundational principle. So very similar to that, or to how, for instance, the early like Indians, like ancient India, kind of like how the early Indians, their roots are in like the Vedic barbarians who settled in, I don't know, like northern India around 1500, 1400 BC. So that's sort of the pre-culture phase right there. So for Russia, so he basically ends up taking Russia and characterizing it as a distinct civilization of its own. He characterizes so Russia is the newest civilization to emerge, and its pre-culture phase was around the time of the Mongols. The Mongols coming, mixing like the Golden Horde, also mixing with the Kievan Rus, and ultimately they ended up, it sort of ended up starting off in almost the same way like you had the Franks that gets going by the time Ivan the Terrible, and then you have the Muscovy, the Duchy of Muscovy coming around. And then so he says that it would have ended up progressing naturally in sort of developing its own internal styles, like distinct, again, that would make it distinct from other cultures, because every culture, of course, has its own sort of artistic and architectural styles that more or less express their world outlook. Like, for instance, you don't find Gothic cathedrals anywhere else than in Europe. I mean, of course, and that's a lot of it has to do with environmental stuff too. He wasn't an environmental determinist in the same sense as what's his name? Jared Diamond. He wasn't a determinist, but some similarities there. But so it basically said, so Russia would have continued on as normal if it weren't for Peter the Great. If Peter the Great would have actually just stuck to kept doing his own thing and didn't get involved in the affairs of Europe, he would have basically been their Charlemagne. He would have like been the progenitor of creating a sincerely authentic Russian cultural identity. However, he didn't do that. He wanted to modernize, he wanted to westernize. And so he enforced those culture forms upon everyone else. And so basically all of the early great works of Russian art and literature express themselves through Western culture modes and stuff. So, for instance, Dostoevsky, he compares Dostoevsky to I think it was to the Apostle Paul, more or less, in the sense where the Apostle Paul, because he ends up saying, so there's the Middle Eastern civilization begins with around the time of the birth of Christ, and eventually leads to Christianity, and then eventually Islam. And Islam for the Middle East was the Middle East's equivalent, or the creation of Islam was to the Middle East what the Protestant Reformation was to Europe, more or less. But so the earliest, so like early on in a culture's life, you have like all these great authors, painters, or not even painters, but like then it's a very religious and heroic period. So think of like King Arthur, kind of like all those chivalric tales and legends, and then you also see religious works. So for like the Judeo-Christian, Islamic, Middle Eastern civilization, you had the apostles who were writing the Gospels, which sort of became the basis of their religion. Whereas, so he said Dostoevsky more or less would have fulfilled that same role, because Dostoevsky actually was planning on writing his own interpretation of the Christian Gospels. Believe it, like, I mean, there's no more than like a couple, like half a draft of like one of them, but more or less he would have set that literary precedent for a distinct Russian culture. However, and then you even do see The Idiot by Dostoevsky. I don't know if anybody's ever read that, but the main character is a Russian prince, and he more or less is a Christ figure in the book. Fantastic book. But either way, but the thing is, like, Dostoevsky, who is sort of that early kind of spiritual like sage or prophet, so to speak, he just, because of the Petronization and the Westernization imposed upon Russia, outwardly he just comes across as any other traditional Western writer. But then, I mean, if you really read his stuff and then juxtapose it next to, for instance, a contemporary of his, like Alexandre Dumas, I think, in France, yeah, they're both writing novels, but two completely different worldviews. One of them is inherently liberal and cosmopolitan, the French, of course, but then Dostoevsky has a very Slavonic outlook, a very, I don't want to say collectivist necessarily, but it's kind of hard to describe, but Dostoevsky has just this really unique way of looking at the world that is really only inherent to late 19th century Russia. But so
yeah, would you characterize his view of things as essentially reactionary in contrast?
So it would look reactionary to us.
So it would be reactionary then, basically.
To us, we would see it as reactionary, but that would only be like, we would only characterize it like that from basically our experience with, basically, because what looks reactionary to us is just a completely different phenomenon internally to them. Like, for instance, let's say, so we take a look at.
No, I disagree though. They're Russian liberals. They're Russian.
No, totally. I'm not saying they're not. I'm talking about Dostoevsky specifically and sort of that. So I mean, you could consider them, I wouldn't say reactionary, but I consider them like nationalists, in the sense where they definitely wanted a distinct Russian identity as opposed to sort of this European megalopolis that really defined the socio-political zeitgeist of the late 19th century, like in the Victorian era. But basically the whole thing, whole reason because of that is because, for the lack of a better way of saying this, Russia in the late 19th century and Europe in the late 19th century were at two completely different places in history. Because like part of the thesis of not just Spengler's book, but also people like Arnold Toynbee, Carroll Quigley, all these great historians of the 20th century, their whole thing was to completely, their entire theses were basically, you cannot understand history by looking at it in a very linear way. History needs to be the study of sort of all, like a comparative study of all these different cultures, which, like you and me, human beings, kind of go through our own life cycles, more or less. Like you and me are talking right now. However, I'm a few years younger than you are. We're not at the same place that we are in our life. So basically that would be the comparison to Europe around 1900 and Russia around 1900. But either way, so one of the major points in Spengler's book was that Western civilization is more or less in terminal decline, not necessarily in the political sense, but more or less in terms of in the cultural sense, where basically no longer is there going to be any like great works of art. Basically, so there's not going to be culture. There's just going to be a hollow, sterile civilization where.
Okay, but some of the best films ever made were produced in the last 20 years, for example.
Oh no! I actually agree with that. So again. So basically, what he got right. So if you read the book, you'll notice he got pretty much everything right, but those few things he got wrong. Oh my God, he got so wrong. Like the United States, he did
the
not.
US is a cultural powerhouse. Like when you think culture in the world, nobody compares to the United States.
Well, no. Okay, no. So, but you're talking, but that's mass culture specifically. When he's talking about culture, he's referring to things like Rembrandt's or classical music, like high culture. So
that's all well and good if you're an aristocrat, but we're interested in maximizing the well-being of the people of the world as a whole. And American culture has elements that, of course, have been drawn from various sources, different cultures, different ethnicities, as well as different classes too, because there is what the Marxists would term a bourgeois element to American culture.
That's a good thing.
but the thing is about American culture is that it's really a blend of everything. Whereas in Russia, there were in all of these countries, if you actually look into it.
But Russia would basically, the whole thing is Russia was still in the midst.
Culture, though, but there was a duality of culture, because if you looked at the Russian court in the 19th century, what would you see? Or the 18th century as well? You'd see the aristocrats and the emperor or the empress. They would all basically speak French, or they would speak this very highfalutin variant of
they were just trying to imitate. It wasn't necessarily sincere.
But then you would have in the villages, you would have a completely disparate culture, which was far removed from the ballrooms,
which is exactly his point. But so you're getting this. So.
But I disagree with the idea that the nobility's culture was just fake and the culture of the peasantry was real per se, because the culture as a whole, when you actually look at Russia, you could say that it was two cultures, and to say that the culture of the aristocracy.
But was that a sincere reflection though of sort of the Russian spirit, of the Russian zeitgeist? I mean, because they were basically exporting.
I'll let you. I'll explain why. I'll let you talk for quite a bit. I'll explain why.
Can I actually get to the meat and bones? Because we're not here talking about we're not really here specifically to be talking about culture so much as.
I was talking about, for example, Peter, and I'm talking about the context of Russia. You have to understand something. One thing that really separated Russia apart from European cultures was, of course,
landlocked, more or less.
No, with this conception, dude, you just gotta actually learn how to listen to other people speaking. Anyway, so the thing is, what separated Russia from the other monarchies in Europe, it was that even by other monarchy standards, even by the United Kingdom standard, even by France's standard, Russia was incredibly absolute in their conception of the Tsar or the Empress or what have you, and so
exactly because
so, no. But here's the thing.
You're getting this.
So
you're completely getting this.
Okay, but you're gonna have to let me speak. This is the thing, right? Because I listened to you for like 15 minutes. You have to learn something. Like, this is especially a good skill to have if you want to keep doing what you're doing on your channel and grow and everything. Gotta learn to listen as well. Here's the deal. Here's the deal with Russia. What's that? Russia had this absolute focus on the Tsar. And so when other people would come in and they'd have these regional levels, or they'd have these various sort of nobility with their different authorities, it was almost a foreign concept to those in Russia, because they would see them and say, well, the only authority that matters is that of the Tsar, and the Tsar is absolute in his or her rule, basically. But the thing is, and so given that, what was the culture of the Tsar? What was the culture of the emperor, the empress? It was this blend of essentially European lingual characteristics, European aesthetics, Western, Central European aesthetics, coupled with a Slavic characteristic to it. And you could say, oh, well, that's not the true culture of the Russian people or whatever. Here's the thing about the Russian culture, though, which is something that's very important and goes over a lot of people's heads. The culture of Russia at that time, the political system of Russia at that time, was so entrenchedly absolute in the Tsar that for all intents and purposes, the culture that actually mattered and forged Russia and was relevant wasn't the culture in the villages. It was the culture in the ballrooms. It was the culture of the royal court, because there, even in the United Kingdom, even in France, I say in Britain, which were at the time still very heavily centralized in their authority around the monarchs, they still had the Magna Carta. They still had all these other concepts. They were a post-slave society, for example, whereas Russia had serfs. The Russian system, that independent culture that separated Russia, it was so focused on the leader and the culture of the leader. But the culture of the leader is what you're basically trying to argue here was fake or whatnot. No. But like, by Russia's own logic, the culture of the Tsar was absolute in essence. So would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, that was more or less the point that I was coming to, because aesthetically, it was Western European. At least this is the argument that he's making. Aesthetically, however, the thing is, but in terms of the absolutism and in terms of the idea of like the serf class and stuff, those social structures and that style of rule, like, again, they didn't have a Magna Carta, kind of like what you said, because they were more or less in their cultural development around where Europe was in the 11th century, so to speak, in terms of how their social institutions functioned, in terms of their sort of political outlook, more or less. However, because they took these aesthetics, it kind of on the outside took the look of like your average like West European court. However, they did not have the same sort of it was a completely different ideology, a more authoritarian ideology, like you said, a more primitive one, quote unquote.
Well, it was absolute.
Exactly.
Conception. It was that all power resided with the Tsar, whereas in other nations in Western and Central Europe and even Eastern Europe, there was a social contract that saw the monarch as having a share of the authority, still the plurality of it, but that there was a devolvement of powers to other bodies, whereas in Russia it was simply whatever the Tsar says goes.
Yep. So. Yeah, because they didn't have any notion of constitutionalism.
Yeah, but I disagree with something you said, though, about the idea of them basically being where Europe was in the 1100s. So what I don't like about that is that it basically implies that if you come back in 900 years, they'll be where Europe was in the 2000s. And it's like, that's not true. With these sorts of systems, especially the more authoritarian systems, and you can see this exemplified in North Korea. You come back to North Korea in 10,000 years, they're going to look basically where they are today, unless acted upon by an external force. And so I don't like that line of thinking that says, oh, well, they'll catch up, just give them time. It's like, no, we need to do something about it to bring about that change, because the more absolute the system is, the more it requires an external intervention, So now, that's especially true these days with the security state. I mean, you can imagine if the SARS had the security apparatus that China and North Korea do, that revolution that happened wouldn't have really gone anywhere, right? They would still be in power today, for example. So I don't really like that line of thinking that just assumes, oh, well, there where Europe was here or whatnot. It's like,
I mean, it's definitely a reductive. It's definitely a
system would never catch up to Europe if not for, say, for example, some of the efforts of Peter the Great or whatnot. And so I guess I have a question for you, though, Politicrat. Do you think that Peter the Great's reforms were good, or do you think they were negative?
You see, I actually don't know. I do not. I'm going to be honest. I don't know enough about Peter the Great and the Petronization process to be able to make that determination, more or less.
Really, but you know what Russia was like before that process came in. Just to explain for the audience, by the way, what we're talking about here.
I'd say for its power, for establishing.
So what we're talking about is that there was this idea before that everything was just, it was all based on nobility and the monarch and everything. Whereas when Peter came in, he set out universal standardized codes for meritocracy, so that even if you were not nobility, even if you were not around the Tsar's inner circle, you could still be promoted within the system. This was fundamentally new, and there were codes and there were standards, and if you achieved well, you could actually rise through the ranks. He founded the Russian Navy, for example, in its modern form. He was somebody who wanted to have a system in Russia in which people that weren't the Tsar's family, could actually move up in society and in the ladder by becoming promoted as officers and whatnot. Whereas before, it would all be like there'd be different tiers in the military.
It was feudalism, basically.
Yeah, it was basically feudalism. And Peter recognized that was woefully inefficient and backwards and whatnot. And he wanted to, in a monarchist version of kind of what Stalin did, he wanted to speed things up towards a more what you might recognize as a more modern sort of capacity, and he was successful in that endeavor. Now, just like Stalin, he was an absolute dictator. I mean, he was a brutal tyrant, but it is correct, though, that what Peter's reforms did was modernize Russia. They did actually modernize Russia, and that sort of thing, though. It raises the question, because you might say, well, did he have to kill a lot of people to get there? Not that many people, not more than, say, Ivan the Terrible or any of these other people. Every despot killed a lot of people. At least with Peter, though, you were getting social progress. So if you ask me, would I rather live under Peter or any of the Tsars that came before him? I'd take Peter 100 times. But
I wouldn't disagree with that. But the thing is, it depends on how you how you look at it. Because you said, do you think that Peter the Great, or do you think that it was better that Peter the Great did what he did? It depends on how you look at it. So from the perspective of me, I guess living there, there might be a bit of a culture shock. But at the same time, in terms of material prosperity, in terms of improving just sort of those standards, then things did get better. However, at the same time, if he did not do that, Russia would, or if nobody ended up doing it, I'm not just going to say him because somebody else could have come and did it, but Russia would not be in the place where it is today.
No, if
it hadn't modernized.
Yeah, it'd probably be Poland today or Lithuania. Like, they would have lost. I mean, one of the things that Peter did...
It probably wouldn't even have adopted communism. It would probably just be like Kazakhstan, more or less, in terms of...
Well, it would have been part of one of these European empires like Poland or the Polish, Lithuanian sort of thing down the road. I mean, the thing is, if they hadn't modernized in accordance with the vision of Peter the Great, Russia was so backward and so disorganized and so stifled compared to even what we would recognize as very almost sort of feudal rivals in the West. They would have gotten curb stomped. I mean, Russia would have been destroyed. They would have been conquered if they hadn't modernized. It
would be like a second world country right now.
No, but what I'm saying is it would literally be a part of Poland. Like, Poland would just have its borders on the Pacific Ocean. Like, how would they be?
I'd say it would at least to the Urals.
Yeah, like what I'm saying is that you can talk about how it might remove some of like old primitive cultural essences and that kind of stuff. It's like, Yeah, but the nation would have been wiped out and subsumed by a more powerful and modern and contemporary power that was willing to do modernization.
That's actually where this is actually in mind you, this entire mind you, so his entire theory regarding Russia, as fascinating as I believe it is, and that's actually why I wanted to come on and discuss it with you, especially with regards to the final point I wanted to make with regards to how he envisions it rising as a great superpower. But I actually, for the most part, do disagree with his characterization of Russia, because I more or less think that either way, again, it would have been swallowed up by like another Western power. But either way, this is the part I think you're going to find interesting, because it kind of ties into the rise of Russia in general. So long story short, I'm going to be very brief with this. So basically, so now, and again, this is putting it into his framework. So right now, Russia is still in that stage where it is expressing itself through European culture forms in terms of aesthetics, purely aesthetics. Whereas it still has its own way of doing things, which is why it is kind of an anomaly in terms of how it behaves when compared to other Western countries, and also why democracy isn't really something of value to them as a culture as much. You have some people who might support democracy, but then we also need to remember that the vast majority of the population, and this is why it still more or less has that absolutist spirit from a political perspective, because a large percentage of the population, I think it's more than 60%, actually like Putin.
Yeah, you're going with Levada Institute right here. Where you have
hold on. I don't want to get into this particular, because I'm making a larger point.
That most Russian households don't have internet access, that a third of them don't even have television access, for example. Like they don't have access to information. So and additionally, amongst those that do, a lot of them can't express their view publicly. It would be like saying that 85% of Libyans support Gaddafi. It's like, well, of course they do. Otherwise, they're going to the gulag. It's like, okay. So
I don't know. It seems like you might be begging the question there.
Well, no, there's another point to this too, which is that insofar as there are Russians that do genuinely support Putin, it comes from 2 points. The first is they have no access to information. The second is there's this understanding in Russia, which is rooted in good reason, that they keep Putin, they legitimize Putin because they'll say, well, he sucks, but it could only get worse without him. In other words, they remember that every time a despot was, passed away or steps down or whatever in Russia, then things get worse. And then it got worse. And then it got worse. So they don't know what it would be like to live in a liberal democracy. It's so far outside their conception that they basically surrender themselves to Stockholm syndrome, except it's not even really Stockholm syndrome, because they can recognize that their captor sucks, but they're just worried that their next captor would be worse. And so the Russian people are crying out for freedom, and it's incumbent upon us in the West to deliver that for them. Because if we were born there, I would sure as hell, or if it was the other way around and America and Canada were shitholes, I would sure as hell hope that there would be neocons in Russia, a democratic system, that would come and liberate us. So,
okay. But what I think is really fascinating, because I know, and this is the part of, because it seems like for the most part, I mean, there definitely, with this general theory, there are definitely some areas of criticism you have. But what I find interesting is, and I know you've come to these conclusions on your own, what's funny is you guys have pretty much come to very similar conclusions, especially with regards to the evolution of their institutions. Maybe not so much on the cultural aspect, but you guys, like you and the author, more or less have the same eschatological framework with regards to the evolution of Russian society and institutions. But this is the part I think you're going to find fascinating, because the argument would be right now what it's trying to do, and you more or less see this not so much in the form of Putin, because Putin just wants power. He doesn't really give a shit about the culture aspect. But then you see these sort of behind the scenes kind
I would push back on that a little bit. No Russian really cared too much.
Hold on. Let me finish.
But like even all these guys,
like
only ever cared about power. Every Russian tyrant has only ever cared about power. Let's just be.
I mean that's the point. Again, we're never going to get to the final point if we keep.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, I'm sorry. I don't mean to sound like a dick or anything, but I am reaching. I'm trying to be as concise with this as possible. But people like Alexander Dugin, for example, and the sort of Slavophile movement that are really pushing for Russia to have a distinct cultural independence from that of Europe in both the economic sense, in the political sense, in the cultural sense. And so more or less the theory was that eventually, as the West continues to lose more and more of its power over time, as it continues to contract, Russia is sort of going to break free from that surface level European mold that it's artificially expressed itself through, again, the aesthetic aspect, and will ultimately become a distinct power. So right now, in the meantime, it might look like Russia is sort of a failing state. And even if Russia ends up balkanizing after the death of Putin and becomes, and again, I do not necessarily think this is the case. This is actually, I actually do generally disagree with him on his outlook on Russia. But the idea is that Russia, especially with as the West continues to contract, that is going to be a vacuum again for Russia to sort of reorganize, so to speak, sort of in an organic way. Because we need to remember that societies and countries aren't just constructs; they're more or less organisms. So sort of organically coalesce and will become basically. His prediction was within the next 200 years. So he wrote this in 1917. He said within 200 years, Russia is going to be the next great world superpower and will be until about the year 2600 or so.
Yes, I would disagree with that for sure. I would say if we don't do anything about them, they will be more powerful down the road than they are today. But I think that...
What if we're at a point where we can't do anything? That's the thing. Like, what if, when you're, you can do something. Like, let's say you're like a 95-year-old man and you used to be strong, but you're pretty much going through old, like basically what comes with getting old. And then you have a much younger person. And so you have this like really buff Ivan Rush, like the Rocky boxer or whatever. So there's 95-year-old you, and then there's that Rocky boxer from, like, was it Rocky 2, Rocky 3? You try to attack him, but the thing is, you're pretty much too old to be able to win. Because, what?
The West has only been around for a few hundred years. We have tens of thousands of years left. Like, we're in our infancy.
Well, no, that's the whole point. Civilizations on average last only for about 2,000 years.
Okay, but we're about...
Well, Western civilization more or less began in the 9th century.
Well, okay, I'm talking like the Enlightenment. When I talk about the West, I'm talking about the liberal enlightened order. I'm not talking like, going back over 1,000 years, that kind of thing. I'm talking about like Enlightenment onward, where we are young, we're in our infancy. And so is capitalism. People say late stage capitalism. I'm like, no, the problems with capitalism that we see today are due to us working out growing pains. We're like not even a kid yet,
But yeah, are we sure? Are we really sure that's the case, or is that just our optimism bias?
Oh no,
Because I mean, I generally like the Enlightenment, but at the same time, there are a lot of aspects of the Enlightenment that, while good in the short term, ultimately, and we've already started to see this, come and start to bite us in the ass.
Okay,
again.
you're going to have to give me one example to start with.
One example, Cartesian rationalism, for example.
Okay, define that and then explain how this is an impediment to the West's
okay, so I mean, again, I'm not talking about geopolitics here. I'm particularly referring to the sort of cultural.
Okay, but
cultural zeitgeist, the more in culture, the more internal, the social fabric.
But Western culture right now is the best society that anyone could have ever been born into, ever. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not disagreeing with that.
I'm not even talking materially. I'm not just talking about your car or anything. I'm talking about in general. We have more freedom now than any system has ever had throughout human history. So, and I'm not even just talking about your car or whatever. Like, oh, it's better than it was 100 years ago. It's like, no. I simply mean our culture, our society. We are at a pinnacle. Yeah, people can point to some random shit that the Russians hype up, like the alt-right or Antifa, and say, oh no, there's a problem here. It's like those things are a drop in the ocean of prosperity. They are insignificant at the end of the day. And our enemies, from Russia to China to North Korea, everything about their culture by and large is rotten. Everything about their social system is rotten. It's like we are a beacon of light. Now, I'm not optimistic per se. I'm with Robert Kagan when Kagan says, look, if we don't fight like our lives depend on it, the enemies will bury us and they'll win. We need to fight like the U.S. fought in the 80s. Like, we need to do everything. We need to work with anyone. We need to, we need to do extreme measures. We need to spend huge on the military. We need to kick ass. We need to counter the rivals wherever they emerge. That sort of thing. I 100%. I'm not of the view that just because we're good means we're going to win. We need to fight like our lives depend on it, because they do. But
what if it's just not? What if it's just not possible?
This idea that Russia could ever be like this youthful sort of thing. When I talk about Russia having an economic rejuvenation, or when I talk about Russia having a geopolitical advantage in the future, that's due to us having weak leaders. That's due to them having more arable land as the world gets warmer. That's not due to some cultural thing. Their culture is always going to be a backwater. It's always going to be holding them back. And Russia, to the extent that they've wielded power throughout the ages, it's been by and large despite that tendency that you're talking about, which is towards this sort of primitivistic, almost collectivistic sort of culture, which by and large, it's not even necessarily organic. We have to keep in mind that went in hand with material conditions on the ground that precluded people from even thinking outside the box, because they had to focus so much of their energy just on meeting their food production. Whereas in France or Poland or Britain, people had free time to do other things. Russia was always a very peasant serf type culture, and that precluded people thinking outside the box. So I don't believe. Then again,
we need to remember Siberia is going to be the next great bread basket, the next great bread basket within 500 years.
Oh, and so is Canada. So is Canada too.
Yeah, I mean, so it's possible. It's entirely possible after at least this current iteration of the United States, when it's gone, there could be a successor that's more so northern, maybe centered more kind of like out of a northern area, built on the same principles. So
U.S. ain't going anywhere. Like the U.S., by the way, even if the isolationists win and stuff, the world will fall. America will still probably be free in 300 years.
I mean, but it would compared to what it used to be, it would be sort of a diminished residual state, very similar to how the United Kingdom is today. Because we need to remember in every single, and this is what Giambattista Vico, who was an Enlightenment historian, wrote a fantastic book, which actually was a major influence on both Romanticists and Enlightenment people, and even Marx's dialectical materialism to an extent. But anyway, but he inspired pretty much every single Enlightenment tradition and anti-Enlightenment tradition that came after. But so he came up with a concept called the conceit of nations, which is the idea that every single culture, no matter what, its people, because everyone has like a sort of natural preference for their own culture, or at least most people do. It's natural in that sense. They sort of have that idea in mind that they are, I don't want to say that they're the most ancient, but that they're sort of the most preeminent from a moral perspective, or because the thing is, and so basically we might be able to intellectualize the fact.
What you're missing is, if I lived in North Korea, America would still have the best culture. If I live in America,
I'm not saying that's not the case. But the thing is, what I'm getting at is, so because we prefer and love our cultures so much, we can never imagine, it's unthinkable to us that it could fall. Whereas, I mean, you're suggesting that the United States is still going to be around in 10,000 years with certainty also. But in order to better, I think the problem is you're looking too much at specifically our culture and aren't considering sort of the wider historical macrocosm, because we need to remember the history of humanity is not just the history of the West or the history of the United States.
Here's what you're missing.
Every single there's not been a single culture that has not fallen.
If for some reason America were to fall and the Enlightenment were to be extinguished, yes, history would go on. Humanity would go on. 1984, you can read it. It's not a very good place to live in. You read Brave New World, not a very good place to live in. The world that would emerge after that would suck to live in. And so when I'm talking about this sort of thing, you need to understand there are good cultures and there are shitty cultures. And America has a good culture and Russia has a shitty culture. And I want America to prevail. And it's very possible for Russia to prevail despite being weaker if we allow ourselves to surrender and be wrought with the malfeasance of our enemies. Because one thing that you're missing here, Politicrat, is how cultures interact with each other. And what Russia has done to undermine the West, what they've done to stoke division in our societies, and particularly the United States, to destroy our moral fabric, to hype up the far left and the far right and pit them against each other, to undermine our military, for example, our cohesiveness. These are things that are not organic. They are in fact, I would even characterize them more or less as an act of war by the Russian state against us.
And they argue that it is organic, but
in this destroyed. Like, if I was in charge, they would not be around after 5 years. I can tell you that.
I'd actually argue that it is organic in the sense that aggression is more or less a natural characteristic of the Russian people, especially because of.
But I disagree. I 100% disagree. Have you seen the protests that have been going on in Russia recently by those that were outraged at the detention of Alexei Navalny? I'm not a Navalny supporter. I consider him an opponent. But it goes to show you how the people there are not some automatons that sing the praise of Putin. They are yearning for some degree of agency in their own lives. And a lot of those people aren't even like supporters of the United States or anything. Navalny isn't. He's a Russian nationalist. But what they despise is this autocratic system that's been beating them down for so long. And they want to get rid of the corruption and everything. Of course, Russia is one of the most corrupt and degenerate countries in the world.
I'd argue the most corrupt.
Yeah, they have 40,000 deaths from alcohol poisoning each year. Everybody, well, not everybody, but a huge percentage of the country's on drugs. They're incredibly nihilistic. They have really no moral foundation. They're just a lost country. And the only reason why their political capacity has been enlarged recently is because of the weakness of leaders here like Obama and Trump that let them get away with expanding. I mean, I can tell you, if Curtis LeMay was president, if Douglas MacArthur was president, if John McCain was president, Russia would be very, very put in check right now. They wouldn't be in Ukraine. They wouldn't be in Syria. They wouldn't be in Georgia. There would be a very different state of affairs. And so I think when people look at the ascendancy of Russia, they see Russia getting wins here and they see Russia getting wins there, and they think, well, it must be a cultural thing in the West. It's like, no, we just had Obama and then Trump, and they let Russia make some moves. Russia's still incredibly backward compared to us.
Let me ask you a question.
We still have a vast advantage compared to them. But the one thing that separates us from Russia is that the leader of Russia has strong willpower, and our leaders have weak willpower. That's it. And so I would argue that, even a weaker military can defeat a stronger military if the weaker military is led by a strong-willed leader. And that's the one thing that the Russian state has going for it, is that despite all the corruption and inefficiency and backwardness and degeneracy in their own country, they at least have somebody who's willing to seize upon the weakness of the West. And so I look at this and I'm like, okay, the West is still good. We need to make the West stronger. The alt-right looks at it and says, oh, the West is weak. Let's side with Putin. I'm like, wow, you guys are weak. You guys just sold out your own.
They're cucks, basically.
Yeah, you guys just sold out your own nation because we got Obama for 4 years or 8 years or whatever. It's like, how about we get some neocons in charge and we start taking back what we lost and we start kicking ass and taking names again, Like, that's my attitude about it. I don't buy this whole, oh, well, in their view, their culture is better than ours, and in our view, our culture is better than theirs. Then why do the Russian people want freedom like we have? Like, there's very clearly one good culture, and the other.
Isn't it possible that their conception of their understanding, of course, they don't have freedom now, and to them, they realize that they don't have freedom. But in terms of their conception of freedom, is it possible that their notion of freedom is different than ours? For instance,
well, they're not a monolith. Like, if you look at some of the people, like some of the feminine protesters, for example, you look at some of the people that stood with the Pussy Riot people, for example, their conception of freedom looks a lot like what people in the West would see as freedom, by and large. Equal rights for women, whereas in Russia right now, they recently made it so that husband can beat his wife, and if she calls the cops, she gets in trouble, that sort of thing. Like, this is a degenerate nation, and they have a vast proportion of drug abuse. Everybody's doing crocodile, and if they can afford it, crack and cocaine, or they're just straight up classically drinking vodka and everything. I mean, I don't know how to make it very clear, but this is a nation that has no guiding values. This is a nation that's completely nihilistic. I mean, like, I don't even like I consider myself agnostic, for example, but some people try to say, oh, well, Russia's Christian and America's atheist or whatever. It's like 30% of Americans go to church each week. 3% of Russians go to
78% are Christian.
Yeah, whereas in Russia, the vast majority of people are basically, they're atheists, but they'll wear the Orthodox cross on their necklace as they post for an Instagram pic in like a skimpy bikini. And it's like, are they actually Orthodox Christian? No, that's just an ethnic solidarity.
Well, there are actually, hold on, let me.
There are
actually indications that there is a sincere religious spike in Russia right now in terms of
system. Russia is, by even the alt-right's definition, they would be classified as degenerate. They do drugs way more. They're way more alcoholic. They're economically deprived. There's no opportunity. There's no future there. They're in demographic decline. They're not in a good state. The only reason why they haven't completely fallen apart is that they've got a leader that recognizes that our leaders suck and takes advantage of us and calls us out and says, I'm going to take this country and you're not going to stop me. And we're like, we're not going to stop you because we're bad. But I can tell you this, if my channel succeeds and everything and we get pro-war people back in charge, just the fact that they're pro-war will spook Putin so much he won't even think of messing with us. Like, because it wouldn't have to come to a war. If he knew that I would nuke him if he invaded Ukraine, he wouldn't take Ukraine in the first place because he knew that I would vaporize him. But he didn't think that Obama would nuke him. That's the problem. You need to have the fear of God in your enemies, so that they don't screw around with you and your allies. Like,
let me ask. Do you mind if I want to ask you a question real quick? And this isn't like a gotcha or anything, because I sincerely want to know what your stance is, because I know last time it seemed like you were taking, at least in terms of your tone, I probably misinterpreted you, but it seemed like you were kind of taking a completely different position. But
really?
You think that, in terms of your view on Russia's future, because it seemed like, I mean, of course, there's a lot to be worried about, but as it stands right now, do you think that Russia is a power on the rise, or do you think that it is a empire in decline?
Well, it's both. I'll explain that. I've got to use the washroom. I will come back. I'll be back in about a minute. I can give you my answer as to why it's both. But I'll expound upon this, but I'll basically say it's on the rise because we are not alert, that we've left the watch currently. We'll be back. And they're also in decline because look at that. They're a culture of degeneracy, drug abuse, alcohol abuse.
All they have is a big army.
What's that?
All they have is a popowerful military. They don't have
their
anything
military
else.
isn't that powerful. Their navy is smaller than the Italian
like
navy.
99 ships or something.
But even just in their capacity, most of those ships are so dated they'd be sunk in the first.
I was referring more to their arsenal and
but
in their
so Italy
army.
has a larger navy than Russia. Italy is the fourth largest navy in NATO. If NATO and Russia went to war, they'd also have to deal with the French Navy, which is bigger. They'd have to deal with the British Navy, which is bigger. And they have to deal with the American Navy, which is substantially bigger. The largest Air Force in the world is the American Air Force. But you might think, well, the Russian Air Force is the second. Nope. Second is the U.S. Navy. Russia doesn't even come anywhere there close.
Isn't the U.S. Navy's Air Force?
The only thing that Russia has right now is they've got about 7,500 rinky-dinky, rusty-dusty nukes that they've terrified everybody with. A ton of people I know are just absolutely terrified that anything that we do might cause a nuclear war with Russia. Whereas I can recognize very clearly, if we went to war with them right now, most of their shit wouldn't even get off the ground. It's just so poorly maintained. They have some advanced stuff that they do practicing with. Some of the Bulavas are kind of scary and everything. We'd lose a few cities if we went to war with them. But mark my words, if we went to World War III with Russia, we would bury their society and they would only be able to take out a few of our cities and bases. Like, it wouldn't be close. It would be total victory for the West. Now, I'm not advocating a war with them. I think you can destroy them economically. And Putin knows if it came to a war that he would lose. He would just be vaporized and their system would fall apart. But he understands that he can get away with taking short-term gains here and there and not push us too far. And he has played in our culture. He has played up the anti-war narrative. It's why he has progressives on his show and why he has alt-righters and promotes them.
Wait, who?
Anti-war. They're both.
Wait, who are we talking about? Who is on his show?
Well, I'm talking about Russia Today. So
okay. I was confused. I thought you were talking about Putin.
Okay. You'll see people like, for example, what's his name? Jesse Ventura. You'll see people like Michael Moore. You'll see people like Caleb Maupin. You'll see all these people on the left go on Russia Today.
Or Oliver Stone.
Yeah, but then at the same time, you'll see on Russia Today Peter Lavelle, Mark Spabolda, all these guys that are deeply reactionary, deeply right wing, and you're like, wait,
Jesse Ventura is he's like center left or radical
centrist. He's a leftist. He hates the American military, basically. Anyway, these guys, the thing that Russia cares about, they don't care if the left or the right wins in America.
No, of course not.
All that they care about is that the Pentagon is undermined. And so for me, I'm interested in preserving and promoting the interests of the Pentagon. When I look at this and I see the Kremlin as my enemy, basically, to basically answer your question, and then I'll use the washer. Russia is on the rise in the short term right now because we've had profusely weak leaders. It's so hard for me to put into context how weak Obama is. I know people say, "Oh, you're just saying that because you're alive under him, and so he looks bad." Whereas if
he was only a good figurehead.
If you were to look at other, no, that's not true. That's not true.
You don't think he was? You don't think he was a good face?
Being the president, 100% had a definitive trajectory on American foreign policy versus if John McCain was president. People who say he's a figurehead don't know what they're talking about, because I'll say this: if he's a figurehead, then if McCain was president, would anything be any different? A lot of things would be different. Oh, well, it turned out Obama did stand for some things, and he did have agency, and the things that he did were pathetic and gross. We can look at the JCPOA, for example. And when I look at this, you might say, well, but Obama looks exceptionally bad to you, Kevin, because you were alive under him. You would have been saying the same thing about other leaders. No. Almost every other American president was far more hawkish and strong than him, at least as it related to domestic stuff and versus the regional adversaries and everything. Obama was an exception. He was really, really pathetically weak.
You think he was worse than Trump, in your opinion?
Yes. I know that's a bit of a hot take. Trump...
Really? Even on foreign policy?
No, I'm specifically talking on foreign policy. Obviously, Trump was better on domestic economics and stuff. But when it comes to foreign policy, Iran, Trump was infinitely stronger than Obama. Now, he wasn't strong enough, but he was still infinitely stronger because Obama was a zero. I mean, he was negative. When we look at North Korea, for example, all 8 years of Obama's tenure sucked on North Korea. Trump... the first 2 years of his administration, the fire and fury days, was the best stance any American president has ever had on North Korea. And the last 2 years were pathetic and worse than Obama.
More than Eisenhower?
Well, but I'm talking about North Korea, I guess, post the Soviet Union. Eisenhower was weak, but when I look at a lot of this stuff, look, Trump was better than Obama. Let's just be real about that. And it wasn't even that close. John McCain would have been way better than Trump, or I should say Obama. He would have been way better. Clinton would have been way better. And she would have been stronger than Trump when it came to a lot of this stuff. Trump was weaker. Well, okay, Trump was weaker on Russia, but Obama let Putin do far worse things than Trump did. Trump was despicable on Russia. He said he trusted the KGB over the CIA publicly at Helsinki.
Did he actually say that?
Yeah, well, because he said he trusted Putin, and the journalist asked, and you can watch this clip. It was from 2018 in Helsinki, Finland.
Helsinki, yeah. Okay, I remember.
No, you can look this up. In fact, I'll be back. I'm going to use the washroom.
Yeah, go pee.
Yeah, look this up right now on your own time. You can verify that this is the case. I'm not spewing you BS. He 100% said that, and it was.
Yeah, I do remember. I was thinking that was probably that you were probably referring to Helsinki.
No.
I just need to
better on foreign policy than Obama, though. And again, I mean, it's just that
even the troop withdrawal.
That's not a compliment of Trump. That's how poor. That's how piss poor Obama was. Obama had Ben Rhodes, for Christ's sake. I mean, he was one of the worst presidents in modern memory when it came to foreign policy. I mean, the only guy that comes close is Jimmy Carter. Jimmy Carter was pathetic. His embarrassment. I mean, but I'll be back in a minute. So,
good person, terrible president.
Not a good person, awful person. All smiles with Kim Il Sung. Awful president too.
What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? What shall we do with the drunken sailor? Early in the morning. Hooray, and up she rises. Hooray, and up she rises. Hooray, and up she rises. Early in the morning. Hey, post what song you want me to sing, and I'll sing it. Just post in the thing. I can sing. No. Should old acquaintance be forgot and ne'er brought to mind? Should old acquaintance be forgot and days old lang syne. Fair auld lang syne, Majo, for auld lang syne. We'll tak a cup of kindness yet, for days of old lang syne. We twa hae run aboot the braes and put the gowans fine, but we've wandered money where a fit same days of old lang syne. Okay, I'm sorry. Snow glows bright on the mountain tonight, not a footprint to be seen. A kingdom of isolation, and it looks like I'm the Politicrat. The wind is howling on Kevin Cassidy's live stream. I actually literally just had chunky monkey ice cream.
Okay, I'm back. And to finish off what I was saying, the extent to which they're on the rise is if we don't do anything about them, they will eventually have more arable land, and they will, they'll continue to make gains in the Middle East. They'll continue to make gains in Europe.
Why do you think that Russia's funding climate change denial too? Because they know that the effects on it are going to clear up all of that space in Siberia. Going to be.
That's the opposite, though. They're the ones that promote the global warming memes so that we won't drill oil.
Hold on, I'm going to pull this up. There was an entire report on that. If
you're Russia, the number one thing that you require is that the West not compete with you on oil and gas, because 65% of your government revenue comes from the export of oil and gas. In other words, they will go bankrupt and Putin will be murdered by his own people if he doesn't keep the pensions coming.
Hold on, I'll post something. I mean, at least you probably disagree then, but at least take a look at these articles. I'll post them in private chat. But yeah, keep going, and I'll. Yeah,
basically the idea is that us in the West, they promote the green parties and everything so that we don't compete.
I don't think their funding support for the green parties has anything to do with climate change or because of their ideology. I think it just has to do with, because again, we were just talking about that. They just want to cause as much chaos and division as possible.
No, I disagree on that. They actively want us to not drill oil, because us drilling oil lowers the price of oil. And if it goes under $80 and it stays that way for a long time, they're done. It's game over for them. The people rise up and overthrow them. That's why they hype up all this kind of stuff, and they get their mouthpieces and everything to talk about how we need to dismantle our nuclear energy if you're in Germany, or we need to not drill oil in Alberta if you're in Canada, and all this kind of stuff, because they don't want competition. Basically, they don't want competition. So
I'm honestly gonna say, fuck. Okay, I mean this kind of tongue in cheek, but come on, I don't. Denmark should have. Come on. Trump's.
Wait, why are we talking about Denmark?
No. Because I mean, I was going to make a joke there, but then that would sound weird. Anyway, what I just wanted to convey was arguably one of Trump's best ideas was to buy Greenland. I think, because all of the oil resources, like on the landmass. Like, what was your opinion on that? Do you remember when he offered
kind of a meme? I really thought it was kind of a meme. I think
it's a serious proposition. We did it with Alaska, did it with the Virgin Islands.
I get that.
I don't know why people didn't take it seriously. JFK literally entertained the same thing. Truman did too, but I don't know why people think. I feel like people thought just because Trump said it, it's because that hasn't happened in a while. People think that it's crazy and that it's stupid, but no, it's really not stupid. It's actually. And I know he didn't propose, like, this wasn't his idea. It was obviously someone within the administration. But I mean, that would have been a brilliant strategic move. But but Denmark, I don't know if it's because of some kind of like petty nationalism or something that they didn't want to sell it. And I know that there's a population in Denmark that would have been mad that they would have had to like the whole citizenship thing, but easily. They could have sold us part of it, and then the populated part would stay as like Danish Greenland or something. Like, I mean, that's really easily solved. Like that would have been, especially if you're concerned for the oil and fossil fuels that Russia's trying to keep us from maintaining or securing.
No,
That
we
would have
have
been a
them
gold
here,
mine.
though. We could just drill in Alaska the Alberta oil sands in Texas and ship it all to Europe, and that would destroy Putin. Like his system would go bankrupt like within years. We just need a green, or not a green. We need a Marshall Plan type level enterprise to get Europe off of its addiction to Russian oil, and they will go bankrupt. I mean, that's why they hype up the Green Party specifically here. It's so that we don't do that. So. Because that would be their death.
But either way, hold on. But either way, what is your? And I know he was briefly in the news, and so this kind of goes back to like the whole Russia being the agent of chaos to just cause as much trouble in the West as possible to like be upheaval. That's, I mean, for instance, that's why they both backed Bernie and Trump and Jill Stein. Surprisingly, not Gary Johnson, which is kind of strange. I think they would, but anyway, probably because he was closer to a traditional Republican in a lot of respects. But either way, Trump, Bernie, Jill Stein back in 2016, because they just they don't care about the ideology that takes over in the U.S. They don't care about the kind of populism it is. They just want something destructive, more or less. And that brings me to
they want to hurt America, so they go for whatever hurts America. They don't care if it's left or right.
And that brings me to something else. So, he was briefly kind of in the, I don't want to say in the news because it really wasn't, but briefly sort of there was sort of a new kind of awareness that was brought to him because he was pretty obscure. And that reminds me, so they had that the new Call of Duty game, the Cold War one, where Reagan sends you to destabilize all the communist countries. It's pretty based. But anyway, so there was the initial sort of promotional trailers. It was Yuri Bezmenov, the communist defector. What is, and the thing is, what I found really funny is you had all of these like sort of woke sites that were saying, oh no, this guy's peddling far right conspiracy theories. And it's like Kotaku had this really retarded article that I was originally going to make a video on, and I tried making a video on it, but I was like, yeah, no, it's not working out. So I just kind of like gave up on that. But either way, but yeah, it's like this guy's former KGB. Why would he be lying about this? And then that he had criticisms, for instance, like same criticisms with Jimmy Carter that you were just talking about, since this was back 70s and 80s. But yeah, I mean, you literally have people who have come out, experienced this stuff firsthand, have worked with the people who are yet they are being completely ignored. And I know you and I both have completely different solutions, more or less, with regards to how we should handle things. But in terms
specifically, like handling
in terms of how we should, in terms of like foreign policy, in terms of how we should deal with this crisis. Again, you're more of the hawkish type. I'm kind of more of a Machiavellian, underhanded stuff. But I'm not going to get into that again, like diplomatic but either way, so you and I definitely have different philosophies on how to deal with these problems, but you and I both recognize the same fundamental flaws and the same, like you and I both see.
It depends, but like you need to specify each one, and because I have a myriad of particular
communist, or specifically the destabilization factor, Russia and China, more or less being existential external threats. And then you and I both, I mean, there are so many people who are not recognizing that. And now I generally tend to think, in comparison with China, and I think this is where you and I kind of disagree, comparatively speaking with China, I think Russia is more of a quote unquote boogeyman, not in the short term, but in the long term.
So you mean not a real threat? Because I consider Russia a bigger threat than China. Right now.
That's the main. I think that's the main issue where you and I disagree. But like, now, this is not something I really want to. This is not something I'm
invading the Middle East. Like China is still working on their economy. Russia's already maxed out on their economy.
Again, I said long term.
Yeah. Well, no. Long term, that's a bit different too. Like the
I
thing
see
that we,
Russia as a wounded beast, that's going
but
crazy right now.
both of these powers could be rendered out of existence in 5 years if we just cut China off from trade. They go bankrupt immediately, and we just drill on oil. Russia go bankrupt immediately, and then what we do in the aftermath, we balkanize the hell of those countries, turn them into like 40 countries, and have the upper hand over each one of them, and then we never have to deal with a great rival again. Basically,
Honestly, at this point, I feel like, so I don't mean to sound like a doomer, and I'm not. This isn't me advocating ideologically, oh, we should go to war with China. But at this point, I think, especially in terms of the social fabric of this country, in terms of just how disunified we are right now, on like a fundamental cultural level, at this point, I feel like the only thing that will be able to strengthen this country on a social and moral level, in terms of cohesion, and in terms of sort of growing again our hegemonic influence in the world. At this point, the only thing I could think of that would do that is a war with China.
I think a war with North Korea would do it. I also think a war with North Korea is necessary. I also
this is why I also think that could actually better. And I don't know if you're going to agree with me here, but even so my background also international relations, and again, there was a relative. I don't know if he would have considered himself a neoconservative, but he was definitely in the sort of Cheney-ish offensive realists with
who is this?
No, a professor I had. Okay. But he said, so number one rule of international relations. Well, number one rule is there's no such thing as the international community. Number two, always support number two on the world island, no matter who it is. Always support number two.
That's dumb. That's
dumb. You don't agree?
That Russia and China both equally hate us, and there's no doing what Nixon did. There's no, like, we can't.
But we also need to remember Russia is just as afraid of China as we are.
We can't do what Nixon did again. We can't go to Beijing and say we want to help you take down Putin because they know what we're up to this time.
I'm suggesting the opposite.
And we can't do the opposite because Putin's not a complete dumbass. And he knows what we're up to. The thing is, additionally,
Russia has more to gain.
But
from China, it's either going to, in the end, come on, it's either going to be us. It's either going to be Russia and China versus the U.S. or the U.S. and Russia versus China. One of them is definitely more preferable than the other.
Knows that we're out to bury them, and they would rather work with China. The fact of the matter is that Putin hates the West, and China hates the West. And unlike in World War II, or you could pick a lesser evil that invaded the other one, China and Russia are not invading each other anytime soon. They're sooner to ally than they are to invade each other. Additionally, when it comes to the Cold War state of things, you're not going to replicate what Nixon did because Mao was generally, or he was genuinely scared of the Soviet Union for good reason. Russia and China are not in that situation right now. They're both scared of America more than the other. And you know, they should be. And that's why you're not going to get it. And you'd be a total sucker to do it. And I also, additionally, I despise that for the simple reason that it assumes that we can't take them both down in 5 years. If we said right now, there's no more trade with China, you guys are done. We take a short-term financial hit, but their system's gone, like, because they would lose all their jobs. If people lose their jobs there and they can't trade with anybody, and we got warships preventing any trade from getting out of their ports, they would go bankrupt. They'd have no rights. They'd have no pensions. The people would rise up and overthrow the communists. And with Russia, we just drill a ton of oil. We bankrupt them within a couple of years. I mean, you saw what 2014 was like. Just a few months of lower oil prices almost bankrupted the regime. We would destroy these guys in a couple of years. We don't need to be dealing with allying with any of them. They're pathetically vulnerable, and the only reason we haven't buried them yet is that our leaders are pathetic. I can tell you, if Curtis LeMay was president right now, within 2 years, Russia and China would not be a thing. they just wouldn't exist as states, and we'd be working to actively turn Chechnya and the Chukchi Peninsula, all that stuff, into their own countries, and have these small countries that we can deal with the upper hand. Like, the world would be so profoundly different if we had a leader out there that was like, look, we're going to lose some money right now, and we're going to take a big economic hit, but we're going to wipe out our rivals, and we're going to avoid a war while we're at it, and guarantee it that, yes, this is going to hurt in the short run, but I'll tell you what, if we let this problem grow and we don't clear out this mold that is these rivals in Eurasia, there will be a nuclear war, and it will be more painful. And I believe that if we don't do anything to stop China and Russia now, while we can destroy them economically, we will have to come into a military confrontation. And I'm not the kind of guy that would say, oh, and we'll probably lose that. No, I think the West could win it, but I'd rather destroy them economically than do a nuclear war. You know,
well, I mean, that's something we 100% both agree on. I'm glad of that.
When I suggest this, I get the environmental nutters that have been brainwashed by Russian propaganda that say, oh, what about climate change? It's like, the climate's been warming for 1,000 years before the Industrial Revolution even started. It's a giant.
I mean, we've just sped it up. That's it.
To a small extent. Like, it's way overstated.
I feel like it's both overstated and understated. Like, come on, you have idiots like Al Gore, and then you have doomsayers like Greta Thunberg, who personally, Greta Thunberg, to me, she is absolutely no different than those like crazy evangelical street preachers who talk about how the rapture's coming. Like, I see them as exactly.
Oh yeah, no, she's given a stage. And by the way, like, she's somebody who, if you come back to her in 10 years, she's going to look back on this stuff and say, yeah, that was kind of cringy. I grew out of that phase or whatever, you know?
Yeah, no, I think it's, it turns out that, the people funding her were actually the ones who stole her childhood.
Well, like, look, it's just
you don't get
it about how we're like, in 5 years the world's going to end unless we raise carbon taxes and all this kind of stuff. It's BS.
No, she's not even. She's against carbon taxes.
10 years.
She literally thinks carbon taxes.
Goddamn time one of these stupid deadlines comes up to the point where, like, we were supposed to have big melting and everything. Right now, it's a nothing burger. You know,
just like when people predict the rapture and it never comes.
No, it's just this whole thing. Like, if you're somebody who in 2021 is still talking about how, like, climate change is going to be our downfall, it's like, you should probably look at Russia and say, would we prefer a nuclear war? Because that's what we're going to do if we don't drill a lot of oil very quickly and get Europe off their addiction to Russian petroleum and gas. And that's my view of it. And hell, we have so much in the way of oil and gas reserves in Canada. And there are countries out there that would literally kill for it. Like, there are countries that have literally gone to war over oil before, like Iraq when they invaded Kuwait or Iran. And yet we're sitting on all this and we're like, no, we can't touch it. Yeah, we were blessed with all this resource wealth, but, like, we can't touch it, man, because the Russians said if we do that, it's going to, like, raise the temperatures 800 degrees. It's like, give me a break, you know?
Yeah, no, and then it reminds me of that, I don't know if you were ever a fan of South Park, but I remember the episode.
Yes,
there's
back
Al
in the
Gore.
day.
I'm super serial. Bear Pig.
He's gonna fight Man Bear Pig. He's half man, half bear, half pig, man. So he's half man, half bear, half pig. Yeah, no, I guess we should kind of get back to the topic of Russia and China. In other words, to answer your question, I despise that idea that, like, oh, we need to work with Russia against China. It's like, we don't need to work with any of them. We're so profoundly powerful, and they're so vulnerable in a way that they weren't in World War II or in the Cold War. In the Cold War, you couldn't take down China and the Soviet Union at the same time. Today, you can take them down at the same time, and it's pretty easy. You don't even need to fire a bullet. Like, these guys are so vulnerable. The only reason we don't is that our leaders are uncreative, they're weak, and they're beholden to a bunch of corporations that don't want to change the status quo because they're making money right now.
It's the managerial elite. It's Burnham's concept of the managerial elite. I don't know if you read Burnham, but he was.
I haven't, no, but
he was definitely one of the sort of grandfathers of neoconservatism. But he wouldn't be considered a neocon. He was one of the original National Review guys.
Right.
I definitely recommend you read Suicide of the West. Fantastic book.
Okay.
So yeah, definitely check that out. But either way. But yeah, no, I definitely think we should. something needs to be done, like in terms of coercion. Like I know, like personally, I agree. I think we should just establish a certain naval hegemony over the Strait of Malacca. That's what we should start with. Kind of just troll China a bit, put more or try to damage them economically. I'm generally not a fan of trade wars, but again, that is the first step to making sure that Xi Huangdi loses the mandate of heaven.
Yeah, well, here's the thing about that. We need to stop treating them as if they're this all-powerful thing. Like, okay, they're a country that has 300 nukes, and yeah, they're building up.
The same about Russia too.
What's that?
I'd say the same with Russia too, because the thing is, the democratic like establishment is so cringe today. Like, I mean, for instance, okay, so like 2/3 of them, when it was one of the debates for this was like 2019, I think, where they were like asked by one of the people, what is the biggest threat facing the United States today? Like 2/3 of them said Russia, and then you have Rachel Maddow spurging out on MSNBS for
wait, it
4
should
years
all
talking
of
about.
them. Russia's the greatest threat to the United States.
No. Okay, so but the thing is, they're talking their rhetoric. They treat it like this is.
Did China hack an election? Did China invade Ukraine? Did China invade Syria? Did China bomb? Like, look, here's the thing about China. I despise the Chinese system, but for the most part, they're keeping to themselves, and to the extent that they're doing stuff abroad, it's economic malfeasance. Russia, on the other hand, is literally invading Europe. Russia's rigging elections. Russia's doing cyber attacks. They did the solar winds hack, which was huge. Kanzik always talks about that over at this channel. Like these are actions that each one of them can be considered an act of war in a way that what China's done hasn't been an act of war towards the United States. Russia used weapons of mass destruction on a U.S. allied soil, that's the United Kingdom, to murder two Russians and murdered 2 British nationals in the crossfire. They are unhinged. They hacked into 30 states' voter rolls in 2016. Putin himself publicly admitted that he supported Donald Trump. These are people. We need to be clear. The Kremlin, the fact that only 2/3 of Democrats were smart enough to recognize that Russia's the biggest enemy. It's like, it'd be like going back to like 1956 and saying, what's the biggest threat to America? And you're like 2/3 say the Soviet Union, and like 1/3 says like, oh, like capitalism, man. It's like, oh, okay, well, I see where you guys stand.
Fun fact. You're gonna love this, but you know who originally came up with the idea of late capitalism? But like all these people who talk about late capitalism don't realize this. But Benito Mussolini, he called it super capitalism, though.
Yeah. See, that's the thing. We're in very, very early capitalism. Like, if you look at capitalism in 10,000 years, we're going to have like negative income tax. We're going to have a bigger sort of,
even 200.
Culture. We're going to have a much more entrepreneurial culture down the road versus today, which is we're still in the lingering effects of the Industrial Revolution. It's still very primitive. We're in our infancy. We got a lot of growing pains to work out. Capitalism isn't perfect, but it's perfecting itself.
What it does is it fluctuates. It's all about like in terms of, it's like good old Heraclitus. Everything happens in flux and strife. Things get better, then things get a little bit worse, then things get fixed, then things get fixed, gets better again. So it all fluctuates. Things gradually get better over time, but the thing is, it's like 2 steps forward, 1 step back.
Didn't you say before, though, Politicrat, and I guess this is getting a little bit off topic, but I remember seeing somewhere that you said that progress isn't real. Like, was that just a meme, or
that was me being edgy?
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I mean,
we don't need to go into it.
Progress, but basically, more or less, what I meant to say, progress is not infinite and deterministic. Kind of like, because I mean, you have back in the 1800s, sort of the Whig theory of history, which is like, no matter what, everything is 100% going to keep getting better and better. Basically, the whole Steven Pinker idea. So basically, progress exists, but the gospel of progress does not exist in terms of like the ideological notion behind everything will get better and better until basically the concept of kind of like how, I mean, things kind of happen in cycles, and then things turn out. It's like progress is only made it's not this one sort of collective concept. When things progress, it is on like a microscopic scale. So society might progress in one way, it might regress in one way, that might get a little bit better eventually. I just think of it like on a mic, like if that makes sense. So like,
okay, well, I would say, yeah, I would say on that, I think the thing about progress is that nothing's deterministic. Like I understand that America is exceptional and that the West is the best and all this kind of stuff. But like, if we're not willing to fight for it and we're not going to do everything as if it's a battle for life and death, then our enemies will, and they'll win out, and the world will just suck for millions of years. I would like, it's not just that I would prefer the West to win. The world would be the better off if the West prevailed, but the West isn't guaranteed to prevail just because we're the best. Because what happens if we say, oh, well, what if we're the bad guys, man? Let's be anti-war. Well, now
Noam Chomsky.
Yeah,
he calls like we're the biggest terrorists.
Listen to the libertarians, for example, and say war bad. Well, our enemies will bury us into the ground, and that'll be that, and we'll have tyranny for millions of years under Russia or China. So in that sense, progress. The West progress exists in the West, but then the West loses because the West
because progress is fundamentally just the conception of it. The in terms of progress as a philosophical notion is fundamentally European.
No, I disagree with that. I disagree with that.
That's kind of a fact. That is kind of a.
No, I'm going to push back on that, because you look at a system like South Korea or Japan. The good things about South Korea and Japan came from Europe by and large. Like,
because we exported that. We exported it to them.
That came out of Europe. This isn't to say that Europe is like somehow magical. The good things had to start somewhere. The Enlightenment had to start somewhere. It could have started in Korea, and then everything.
I actually disagree. I think the Enlightenment really, in terms of, I think the conditions, Europe's really the only place, and this is not a discussion I want, because this can be an entire 2-hour live stream.
We don't need to go into it. I'm just saying that.
But I just think the conditions, Europe's the only place where the conditions.
The good progress that's happened, the good material progress, everything that makes Japan and South Korea better today than they were 100 years ago is Westernization.
No. Because we exported the idea of progress to them. They understand the idea of progress because the idea was introduced to them. But in terms of devising it as a philosophical concept, that is a fundamentally Western notion, very similar to how Taoism could not have come out of Africa.
I don't care about like the study of the knowledge of something. I care about the material effects of it, and progress as it exists is something that benefits a Korean or a Japanese person or a Vietnamese person equally as it would benefit a German or a Portuguese person. It's not it's something that only the Europeans get to experience or whatever. And it doesn't matter who conceptualized it first, because even if you can't put a name to it, it's a thing that exists, just like the laws of physics or gravity or whatever are. And it's real, and so what? It happened to as a study be initially conceived of in Europe, which like I'm going to need a citation on, because of course things did progress.
It has to do with the idea of especially
as well
linear eschatology too.
But I don't care about that stuff. I just care about making the world better. And I don't care about labels or any of that sort of thing. And we can talk about. I was just
going to say, but basically, all I was saying is it comes out of Christianity.
It's like, no, Asian. Look, okay, Russia, China, they're individualist cultures. North Korea, they're individualist cultures. The difference is only one individual matters, and everybody else works for one individual. Like North
China, China has no concept of the individual.
No, I disagree. All these
every Chinese exchange
were all just about the individual rights of the emperor and the supreme authority of the emperor. That's individualism. It's just a hyper version of individualism. In America, everybody's kind of like their own emperor.
Or is that emperor worship?
Yeah, like
that's not really individualism if he's seen as the only individual. I would not call that individualism, at least as we understand it.
It is though, because there's no like that whole it's all harmony and stuff. That's bullshit. It was always about force and coercion, and it was always about the wealth of one figure at the top. That is an individual system. This mysticism and all this bullshit that gets labeled onto it, it's like, no, there's nothing mystical about it. It's you have to do this, otherwise you go to jail or you get tortured. It's like, it's as simple as that. I mean,
but the prime unit of identity in China is the family unit. We need to understand that.
In America, and it has been for hundreds.
No. Okay, look at it like look at it like this. If you fuck up in a Western country, that is on you. Whereas if one person, if you're in China and one person does something, if they fuck up, it doesn't look just bad on them. It looks bad on their entire family. That is the main unit of society. The family, not just the nuclear family, but the extended family, whereas it's more about individual accountability in Western countries. I've talked to so many Chinese people before. They've explained how they didn't even...
Trump family. Look at the Trump family. You had one Trump brother who rejected a lot of the like the business culture, and he wanted to become a pilot or whatever. And the rest of the family thought that it was a big shameful act and everything.
Well, I'm talking about how society views. I'm talking about how the rest of society views, not within the family itself.
No, Politicrat. You really mean to imply that you got a family of like doctors and lawyers, and if one of their sons or something wants to go out and just become like a construction worker, that's not going to look as embarrassing upon the family? Give me a break. American families,
that's not what I'm talking about, though.
Perception of like keeping up with the Joneses and everything and all this, just as they do anywhere else, where the actions of one person can bring shame on the family. That's not something that only exists in freaking China.
I'm not saying it only exists in China. I said that is the fundamental outlook in terms of the primary unit of society. Whereas society in the West
is still the core unit in the West. Like, my point is, in China, everybody has to do their thing so that the leader has his prestige and his swag bands. Whereas in America, you can have a swag bands and you can have prestige too. But the family is still a core unit in America. Think about it.
It's not the prime unit.
Money through your family. Your families help
each other out. It's not the prime unit. I don't think you hear what I'm saying.
Yes, it is. No. When I say individualism, I'm not talking about literally every person is this atavistic, solipsistic individual that exists independent of anything else. No. In America, the core unit is still a family. It's still a family or a household in terms of, in terms of the economic.
I'd say in Europe, maybe.
But no. But your
family unit's really broken down, and it's like not as respected as it used to be.
In some ways out of touch from the reality of the situation, which is that in America, there is an emphasis on family. And you might say, oh, well, it looks different than in China or whatever. Yeah, that's because America is a free country and China is a literal dictatorship under communism. So
do you really think, I think the entire concept of, especially in America, and this is a really sad thing, the entire concept of the family, especially over the past 50 years, has been purposefully, or at least still in the midst of it, completely deconstructing it. Like, you have all these like critical theory people. I'm not even going to say the postmodernist thing, but the critical theory especially, trying to flip the entire concept on its head. The family is broken down, and now it's seen as like non-important and even vilified in some degrees.
Gays can adopt kids because gays can adopt kids.
I never said that.
Weaker than China. Is that what you're getting? No. You're gonna have to fucking explain what you mean here, because I don't 100%.
Do you literally not see people, for instance, people talking about, okay, I'm going to put career first before this. You have people who say they no longer want to have children.
You have to actually explain yourself in goddamn specifics, okay?
Okay.
Because right now,
the child free movement, for example, the child free movement. People who purposefully do not want to have children. When people in a society no longer see a reason to have children, that's a bad sign. Divorce rates have gone up, have skyrocketed because, I mean, yeah, divorce rates have skyrocketed. And yeah, I mean, you should, I'm not saying divorce shouldn't be allowed. Of course it should be. But the thing is, it's become so normalized that that's led to a fundamental breakdown in terms of the sort of idea that the sanctity of the family. Yeah, the family's still seen as important. But the thing is, it's taken a sort of a back seat to people pursuing their own sort of individual success. You have people like, for instance, again, people who
no, but you're just look. You have to get challenged on that. So you would really argue that somebody who's in an unhappy marriage shouldn't be able to leave that
of
because
course they should. I just said that. I
So
just
then
said they should be able to.
goddamn issue.
But the thing is, no. But
Yeah.
the thing is, nobody. But the thing is, like nowadays, it's not just people who are in an unhappy marriage. Like at this point, it's just been so normalized that yeah, people who are in legitimately unhappy marriages.
Gets divorced because it's fun. It's the same thing with like an abortion. Nobody gets an abortion because it's fun. It's something that happens, and if people find themselves in something that didn't turn out too well, I think a big part, honestly, of the whole divorce thing, by and large, is because there's a hell of a lot of well, there's an economic aspect to it as well as the cultural aspect of it too, which is that in a lot of the United States, for example, people are told, oh, well, you can't have sex until you get married, and so people are like, oh, well, I really want to have sex, so I'm just going to get
and then they get married early. Yeah, no, I definitely disagree with. I don't think that you especially see this with like evangelical fundamentalist Christians, and I've always been critical of those people, where again they just want to get the sex out of their system, so they get married at like fucking 19, end up getting divorced 10 years down the road.
Well,
I think that's a major part of it too.
The Catholics are even more notorious for that than the evangelicals.
Really? I mean, I've honestly seen the complete opposite.
Dude. Look at Latin America, dude. I mean, seriously. So
yeah, but their divorce rates aren't nearly as high.
That's because that's because they live in a culture in which it's seen as unacceptable. So they stay in woefully unhappy arrangements, and they don't have a culture of
it still compels them to work at their marriage, though.
What?
In a lot of ways. Because it's so easy to get a divorce. Some people just don't even want to try anymore.
It just means that the husband can beat the wife, and she can't.
Yeah, no, but that's only one reason that people like. That's only one particular reason. And in that case, if like a husband's beating their wife and all that stuff, that is 100% the woman needs to get the fuck out of that. Like unequivocally, they need to escape that situation. However, you also have couples who are just like, especially you see this now, again, who will just start arguing, and they won't even bother seeing a marriage counselor.
Nobody gets married with the intent that they're going to have to divorce. That's not a thing.
I never said it was. I think you're strawmanning me right now.
It's fucking Chinese Confucianist, basically propaganda at this point, to try to make the West look like disharmonious or whatever. No, look, life fucking sucks in China. For all the faults that exist in the West, we are infinitely better than they are. And they know it. And the only reason why they can't get out is because they are under the stranglehold of the goddamn communists. And they control their education system. They control everything so that these people are brainwashed.
It's called the Mao Dynasty.
The
Mao or the Red Dynasty.
Well, it's not dynasty. It's similar to what Stalin had after Lenin.
Well, yeah, no. I mean, basically, it's the same. Basically, I mean, it's the same system. China's basically had this fundamentally authoritarian, totalitarian system for the past 2,500 years. Right now, it's just in the form of communism. Xi holds the mandate of heaven. They just don't call it the mandate of heaven anymore for the sake of optics. It's, I mean, that's why I call him. That's why I call him Xi Huangdi. Xi the Yellow Emperor.
I disagree with that because the communist system that exists now and has existed since 1949 is so much more murderous and so much more deadly than anything that they had before. It's the same as like saying that Stalin
it's that on steroids. It's that on steroids.
It's saying that Stalin was a czar. It's like, no, he's not, because even when the czars wanted to butcher their people, like Ivan the Terrible, they could only kill a tiny, minuscule fraction what Stalin was able to kill, because communism is an ideology that allows for you to build the mechanisms to butcher on a wholesale level that a reactionary backward monarchy doesn't have the efficiency, doesn't have the security apparatus, doesn't have the competency to do. And so in that sense, if you ask me, would I rather live under an absolute monarchy or would I rather live under communism? I'd rather live
monarchy.
under absolute monarchy, because to the extent that they're going to murder people, look, the Tsars for 400 years had one political prison at Solovki Island, for example, and they killed 500 people there. Lenin, in one day, killed more political prisoners there, for example, than the Tsars did in 400 years. So it goes to show you the extent to which communism is totally murderous. Now, so I disagree with this idea that Xi Jinping is just like another emperor. No. He's grotesquely worse. His control over the country.
Yeah, just because he's the worst emperor they've ever had doesn't mean that he's not an emperor.
So communism is a different system, and it's actually anti-monarchical. Like what they're trying to build is world communism, okay? And that's not the mandate of heaven. It's not like you could actually make that case easier in North Korea, where there is a thanatocracy element. In China, there's not. It's just straight up communism. It's like Stalin, just in China, basically. So, I mean, look at what they're doing to the Uyghurs right now, for example.
Oh, did you hear about Biden? Did you hear about Biden, the whole thing with Biden? What he said about
it was absolutely embarrassing, and I'm going to have a video on it very soon. So,
can we talk about that for a little bit?
I don't want to get into it right now. I want to get back to just wrapping up what we're talking about right now. Obviously, a lot of stuff came up, but again, I find this idea that somehow the West is weak or whatever. What I think you're missing, the Politicrat, is that for all these faults that these sorts of things bring up, you're missing how much better it makes society and how much more free it builds us. Because, like, so for example, you talk about divorce. Now that couple's able to go about their own way and find new partners and everything, they're able to lead far better and happier lives.
I think it's a good thing that they have that option.
But the material result and aggregate of this is that we have right now, even spending 2.5% of the economy on the military in the United States, so much more military power and ingenuity and innovation than the Chinese or the Russians, who still have to copy everything. Why is that? It's because we have a free society with a strong capitalist economy where we can spend a small amount of our money on the military and it's still way more than they can even hope to muster, and they still have to copy from us. And why are we the culture that's always coming up with the new inventions? Why are we the one that's always coming up with the new tech? And why is it that China and Russia are always
exactly? No, I mean, because we're fundamentally Promethean. It's
because we are free. We have these things that allow people to become the best that they can be, and it is that progress. It's that freedom here that ultimately brings about our greatest potential for world hegemony. And if you wanted to be more direct about it, outright, straight up, you could conquer the world. Like if America invaded the world right now, America could win. America could definitely win that, and Russia and China couldn't. And you might say, well, how does that relate to divorce and everything? All of this in aggregate, all those freedoms that we have here allowed us to be the society that always has the best innovation, always has the best economy, always has the biggest output, the best product.
I'm sorry. Atheist Gone Wild. I'm sorry. I just need to see that. That is hilarious. Cow cook shit see. Yeah.
Well, then that's Kremlin, Kyle. That's secular talk. He's got almost 1 million subs. He's here.
No, yeah, so. But either way, I actually just want to. And again, I'm not taking a particular stance on this, but I just want to play the devil's advocate real quick.
No, but I am taking a stance. I have an objective.
No. I just want to play the devil's advocate real quick to see what you have to say about this. So we need to remember that Western civilization is inherent. Well, first of all, I'm going to say what you're suggesting in terms about is like exporting all this great technology, material wealth, resources all around the world to all these other countries. In a sense, could that not be a Faustian bargain? Because Western civilization is fundamentally Promethean civilization. Just like how Prometheus took fire and delivered... Hold on.
Define a Faustian bargain for me.
A Faustian bargain... Do you not know it? You know the story of Faust. I mean, it's an old German legend. And then, of course, it's Faust, the play by Goethe. It is considered the most important work of Western literature within the past 500 years. it's about the or he's like a doctor, he's like a polymath who more or less ends up having a midlife crisis, and he realized the source of his midlife crisis is because he realizes that he will never live long enough to do everything that he's always wanted to do. So he ends up making a deal with the devil, more or less, that he can have eternal life and he'll be able to pursue every single thing that he wanted to pursue, gain infinite knowledge. However, the caveat is the moment that he feels so fulfilled that, like, the moment he feels legitimate fulfillment and happiness from some sort of discovery that he makes, or just some sort of thing that gives genuine happiness, that is the moment that he will drop dead, more or less. The term Faustian bargain refers to basically when somebody makes a decision that seems that like they want in the moment, that seems like a good idea, but it ends up more or less turning back around on them and backfiring. So basically I'm saying could not. So basically what I'm saying is Western civilization is fundamentally Promethean civilization. Just like how Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to man, the West develops its technology, its techniques, its systems, its mechanisms that have allowed us to succeed, and gift it to the rest of the world. Hoping that the rest of the world will advance because of that.
No, that's not true. The reason the Soviets got atomic bombs, for example, wasn't because we gifted them anything. It's because they had spies that stole it, and that's an act of war, basically.
But was not creating the nuclear bomb in the first place. Isn't it possible that was itself a Faustian bargain?
No, I disagree because, like, let's lay out an alternate scenario where the Soviets steal this knowledge. America makes it very clear after nuking Hiroshima and Nagasaki, says, we will not tolerate any other country in the world ever seeking these weapons of destruction. We will be the sole bearers of this to preserve the peace in the world.
Just by creating them, other people found out to set a precedent.
The Soviets are going to get to work now on the stolen designs that they've got from Klaus Fuchs and the other communists at Los Alamos and the other traitors and the Rosenbergs, et cetera, all those types of people. They're going to get to work and they're going to design their device, and they're going to go about it and everything. America will, and now in this scenario that I'm laying out here, America's made it very clear that if you try to get this, we will bury you. Now, the Soviet Union can't hide all of this technology. Now, the Americans know that they're going to be working on it. The Americans give them a 20-year timeline as they did in our reality. And so America says, okay, well, it's very clear what their intent is. They're the only country with the capacity to do it. We're doing Operation Unthinkable. We go in, 200, 250 nukes, take out the Soviet Union, destroy their industrial capacity, hit all their factories and whatnot, and then roll in with tanks. They can't really fight back. Soviet Union falls by 1948, 1949. They never got nukes.
So are you
from that point now, understand no other country ever even has a chance, because while America's working on the most advanced nukes ever, if anybody even tries to get the basics, they get nuked. So they're never going to try. So they'll never catch up. So
you don't think they'll ever be able to nuke us back, like mutually assured destruction?
No, but exactly not. Because, like, let's say, for example, now North Korea wouldn't be a thing. None of these countries, communist China, wouldn't be a thing because the Soviet Union would be gone. But, like, let's say down the road, a country that hated America came about, and they're like, we're going to start trying to figure out nukes and all this kind of stuff. America would just nuke them. Like, they just wipe them out. They wouldn't even have to nuke them. They just wipe them out and make it clear. Look, we have all these H-bombs and everything. You're not going to do this. If you decide to go down that route, we'll destroy you before you get anywhere near close. So this idea that, oh, we give our enemies the means that we took all this effort into, and then they just engineer it from us and everything. There are two problems with that. The first problem is that it assumes that the West is powerless to nuke these guys in retaliation. We're not. Like, if I was in charge, I would nuke the Soviet Union. If I was in charge in 1962, I would have nuked the USSR, and that would have been that. We'd have world peace today. But the second part of it is, the second thing that you're missing is, it assumes that there's ever going to be an end thing, like the last thing that you can invent, and then we give it to the enemies, and then they destroy it.
I don't think there is an end of history.
We're always going to be multiple steps ahead of China and Russia because, yes, they can steal and it's cheaper to steal than it is to do original research. But we're always going to be a leg up over them because they're not free and we're free. And we have things here that you criticize, like divorce and all that kind of stuff, that in aggregate, with all kinds of other freedoms, add up to us being the guys that are creative and can think outside the box and come up with things. And yes, the Russians can catch up to, like, say, where we are right now in 20 years. But then in 20 years, we'll be 20 years or 50 years or whatever ahead of them. They will always be working on new stuff. Like there's never a maximum point. There's never an end point, because you might think, well, what about nukes and stuff? It's like, yeah, but now we're working on lasers. We're working on rail guns. We're working on rods from the gods, all this kind of stuff. And then after that, we're going to be working on like using stars and harnessing their power to destroy planets and stuff. Like it's always going to be
like
one step after another. And so that this idea that us doing it brings about our downfall, I so fundamentally agree.
I'm not even arguing that. I was just playing the devil's advocate.
Okay, but I guess what I'm getting at is just that it goes back to willpower. If we had strong leaders in the West that just said straight up, look, we're going to regard theft of our designs as an act of war, and we will freaking vaporize you if you go about doing this, then that'd be that. And if they want to go down that route, you just nuke them, basically.
And steal the Krabby Patty secret formula.
No, but like I'm dead serious right now. I think that for the areas that the West has failed, it's because we haven't been resolute enough and willing to do the things. We weren't willing to crack some eggs. Like, you want to make omelet, you got to crack some eggs. Likewise with Operation Unthinkable. Imagine the West nuked the USSR in 1948. We'd have world peace right now. Like, the world would just basically be American. Communist China never would have been a thing. North Korea never would have been a thing. Vietnam would have never been a thing. Like, all this stuff would have been a Western hegemony forever. And all it would have taken was a few hundred nukes, get rid of some Soviet cities and stuff, and boom, you've won the world. Like, again, we make things complicated because we root for the underdog. But how about for once, we root for ourselves and we bury our enemies, and then we dust our hands and we have dinner and we rule the world forever? How about that?
Yeah. Then we go home, eat some steak, sleep with our wives.
I like steaks. No, dude, I like the grilled food, dude. So.
Yeah. But either way, something else I was going to say. Fuck. Forgot what I was going to say. But either way, and I don't mean to like cut it off, because I mean, honestly, I don't know about you, but I know it got a little heated earlier, but I've actually quite enjoyed this conversation.
It's interesting. But I think every advantage that Russia's had, it's been advantages that we've let them get away with. And if we got tough and we got leaders like John Bolton, we got leaders like Curtis LeMay, we got leaders that made it very clear, they fuck around, they get vaporized, they're done. They go and run off in their corner. Putin's a bully. He'll steal your lunch money, but if you stand up to him and say, "Hey, man, I'll kick your ass if you do that," he'll be like, "No, don't hurt me, man. He's a bully."
Sounds like an after-school special.
That's right. Like Russia,
foreign policy after school.
The only reason why Russia looks tough is because we just let them get away with stuff. If we stood up and said, like, "Look, what you're doing right now, if you think you're going to get away with that, you better like not do that." Like, imagine Putin goes in back in 2014, and Obama said straight up, like, "Look, this is a red line. You go in there," but like he was serious about it. You go in there, it's war. Putin wouldn't do it because he's all tough. He's all tough talk. He's all tough action until you stand up to him. And the proof of this is Turkey. All that Turkey had to do to get respected by Putin was just shoot down one of their freaking planes, and he ran off and was like, "Oh, don't hurt us." And you're like, dude, they don't even have nukes, and they were able to cock you. Like, he's a bully. They're just because he knew he was weak and he knew that he couldn't do anything. And so if we said, you know what, we're going to stand up and be strong. And by the way, we used to have a culture like that not that long ago in the West.
I think it's also internal social decay has sort of eroded sort of that sense of.
Well, that was sponsored by the Russians, though. That wasn't an organic thing. That was sponsored by the Russians to hype up the hippies.
So you think the entire 60s were the Russians' fault?
You say? Well, no. I think the anti-war stuff was like, it's a fact that the KGB organized that. So
yeah,
that
and even they so, and I'm not saying that that, mind you, I'm not, civil rights movement was good and all that, but you also look at, they wanted to cause as much like chaos as possible. They even sort of like meddled in that too, because they realized that as much chaos as possible, as much division as possible.
yeah, I know. And
They
by
took
the way,
advantage of
I
that too.
support the civil rights movement, but it would have had to have been fully organic, and there were figures associated with that.
Kind of like what Russia did with apartheid too.
Yeah,
Right.
that were obviously in the pocket of the Kremlin, and that's a problem. And there were actual terrorists and stuff, and you had the Black Panthers and stuff like that back then, and everything, and people with very unsavory actors. The thing is,
It's exactly why Malcolm X separated himself from the Nation of Islam.
clear about something, because on the other hand, what some people will do is they'll say, just because the Russians supported the hippie stuff, and just because they supported some of this stuff to that's on the left to cause chaos, they'll ignore the fact that the Russians also hyped up the far right in America at the time. And they'll then go on from that and say that every action of social progress that's happened since the 60s is just the Russians winning. And that's so stupid. I had some guy
that is a very it's so reductive. Yeah.
try to argue to me that America actually lost the Cold War and that the Soviet Union won the Cold War.
I think the Cold War's still going on.
Because we have feminism and stuff now. And I'm looking at this.
No, that's cringe. That's really cringe.
Kidding me? The Soviets lost. They're done. They're buried. They don't exist anymore. Like, forget Afghanistan. They don't even have their own country anymore. They're done. They got buried by the West. So this idea that, no. The Russians had no dog in that battle. They didn't care who won. All that they cared about was that America lost.
Chaos. So. They just wanted as much division and chaos as possible. I agree. Honestly, I do find those people who are like, America is weak because feminism. I find those people so cringe. Like, I can't believe.
Specifically say that it's like a Soviet thing. Like, just because the Soviets were involved with some movements in the 60s to try to get America out of Vietnam, therefore everything about liberalism is just the Soviets winning. That's so stupid, because the Soviets were anti-liberal. They hated
yeah, exactly. No, I mean, no, but yeah, they basically they didn't. It's not because of liberalism itself. It's because they poisoned liberalism.
No, I don't even really think that. There were parts of movements that they hyped up and everything. That doesn't necessarily mean that the movements in and of themselves were even bad, or what they were fighting for was bad. So
like the civil rights movement, that was good. However, they definitely wanted, again, to cause as much damage as possible, which is why they infiltrate that. Same with the rise of the Klan again back in the 50s and 60s.
Also has been associated with the Russians.
Did you see that move? Did you see
David Duke, for example? And you ask him, what does he think about Russia? He's a fan.
He loves Russia. He has a house in Russia.
Yeah,
he has an apartment in Moscow.
But so does Edward Snowden, and so does Jill Stein's a fan of Putin and everything. So this is the thing. They don't care if the far left or the far right wins, but you'll have people on the right. Also, you'll have people on the right that look at progress in American society and then say, oh, well, that was just the Russians winning, without realizing that if you had like more reactionary movements in American society, that would also be the Russians winning. So
Richard Spencer also was married to a Russian, I think, when he was
Look, the Russian system, by the way, one reason why they do this is because they know that they can't fight us. This is the cowards' resort. Right?
They're pussies.
This is the cowards' resort. It's why they do cyber warfare. It's why they hack our elections. It's why they do all this. It's why they do the memes and stuff, because they understand that we would nuke the shit out of them, and they couldn't even get most of their nukes off the ground if a war broke out. So they know they would lose a war, so they have to try to destroy us from the inside. And the second that we get leaders, and that's what I'm trying to do at this channel, so that we can change the culture, so that we get leaders that will stand up to them and say straight up, look, we know why you're doing what you're doing, because you understand that you would lose a physical confrontation with us. Understand, you hack us one more time, you do another cyber warfare thing, you do any of this sort of stuff, it's game on, and we will vaporize your mansion, and we will vaporize the Kremlin, and we'll vaporize all your assets, basically. And they will fuck off, and they'll leave us alone, because otherwise we'll vaporize them. So... Anyway. And Putin, all he cares about is his money, and if he's particulate in a radioactive cloud, then he's not going to have that
He
money.
doesn't care about what happens after he dies.
So exactly. So he'll run away into a corner because he doesn't even have any allegiance to Russia. He just sees Russia as a conduit through which he can get more money for his Swiss bank accounts. So
take the money and run. He'd do that at any point.
Basically it. That's basically it. And so the thing is, for me, when I look at all this, I want to get the Russians out of our society. I want to win. And the way that we win isn't by pointing out all these flaws in our society and saying, oh, we're doomed, and saying like, oh, look at them and everything. No. Their societies suck. Our society is awesome. Yeah, it's not perfect. We can make it more perfect. They can't make theirs more perfect. If they try, they get arrested or they get beaten into the ground or whatever.
Oh, also, before I forget,
and I'll just say this, we have to get back pride in us being the best, because our enemies, they obviously don't have that problem. They're patriotic and everything, and we are the best, and we are exceptional, and we need to stop with the false equivalencies. And I would argue, yes, we also need to drop the devil's advocacy for the most part. Devil's advocacy is a good tool to get inside the mind of your opponent, and I've done a 40-minute long video called On Devil's Advocacy. But you need to be understanding that when you do it, you have to do it in a very careful way so that you don't wind up sympathizing with the devil. Because if you play devil's advocate your whole life, eventually you become the devil, and we're not interested in that, and we want to win. And I always find it ironic when people will make arguments about, well, maybe they're better and we're the bad guys and stuff. When they live in the West, they get cushy hot pockets and get to go to McDonald's and everything. And the societies that they show for, people are miserable and would kill to get a chance to come here. These people are fifth columns. They are seditious. They are cretins, and they are anathema to our values. And honestly, they're for all intents and purposes in this Cold War treasonous. So that's my view. So
there's something one more thing I want to say. It also goes back to Russian and the destabilization stuff. What I find interesting, did you know that the Christine Blasey Ford, the person who accused Kavanaugh of raping her at a party or something in high school or whatever, no corroborating evidence or anything. Did you know that both she and Tara Reid, who had an even more pathetic story about Biden assaulting, do you know both of them actually have connections to Russia?
Oh, I knew Tara Reid did. I didn't know about Blasey Ford. I think
at least Blasey Ford's brother is tied to I think it was Fusion GPS.
Oh, well, if you can send me the article on that. All that I've seen was Tara Reid. Tara Reid, yes, she was in the pocket of the Kremlin. That's basically confirmed.
They're both liars. I mean, I think they're both liars. Actually, no, I don't think Blasey Ford. I'd believe. I'd be willing to accept that, and honestly, I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. She probably just forgets. She probably and maybe was tried to use it as an excuse to derail. Like, she might be a liar. She might just be.
I'm not going to comment on it right now. I can just say about Tara Reid. Reid is
a bad act, fifth column. Yeah.
She's a fifth column. Well, yeah, she's basically a fifth column. We need to distinguish between fifth columns and useful idiots. Useful idiots are people who will say, "Oh man,
Jimmy Dore."
Yeah, no. Jimmy Dore's actually paid. Like he's received a lot of money from the Syrian government, for example. He's a fifth column. He's also received money from Russia, so he's
Kyle
not.
Kalinske is useful idiot, fifth column.
My gut feeling is a useful idiot, but it's hard to tell. What I was going to say is a fan of Kyle that gives money to his Patreon, useful idiot. Probably not an actual fifth column. But when you're getting money or you're getting directives or you're basically influenced by and garnering, favor with the Kremlin or any of these other anti-American entities, you're not a useful idiot. At that point, you become treasonous. And I believe that these people need to be rooted out. There needs to be an investigation into all this. I can tell you, if I was in charge, there would be a lot of committees underway investigating the ties of all these figures in media and whatnot to the Kremlin, to Beijing, and we would find out, you know, just how organic these guys' views actually are, and it would and it would be a step towards us, you know, bolstering our defenses against this this cultural connivances from our enemies. I mean, people talk about it as if, what do you mean we're in a Cold War? It's like, are you dumb?
No, I'd say it's not. I'd say it's a hot piece.
What's that?
No, you said, or you said, the people are saying, "Oh yeah, we're in a Cold War." No, I'd say it's a hot piece.
Well, like I say, it's a Cold War.
Yeah, the Cold War never ended. I mean,
the Cold War never ended.
We just stopped fighting it.
Stopped fighting it, and the Kremlin swapped out communism for fascism. That's all that changed. And we also continued our relationship with communist China as if the Cold War had never ended. That's the thing that's funny. So we got the worst of both worlds, because with Russia, we pretended it was over, and with China,
they never stopped fighting.
And with China, we pretended it wasn't over, as if we're still going to trade with them because they can help us against the Soviets. It's like the Soviets don't exist anymore; they're the new enemy. I mean, people often say, "Oh, Kevin, he's a shill for neoliberalism." I call myself an anti-neoliberal. I'm opposed to free trade, for example. I'm a protectionist. I'm somebody who regards China as something that, after 1991, we're done, and they should have been, you know, they should have got the Soviet treatment after that.
No, that was a Faustian bargain, keeping trade open with China.
Well, some people would argue that it was a well-intentioned mistake.
No. At first it was, but continuing our relationship with them. That's what I say.
Well, that's because the neoliberal establishment wanted to make a quick buck off of them, basically, and they were successful in that. That's one of the problems with.
Now they're just going to take the money and run.
That's one of the problems with unregulated capitalism, is that if the state doesn't come in and tell these companies what they're allowed to do or whatnot, they will pursue profit, even if it means selling out to communism. And that's a problem, because if you want to protect communism, you need the government to come in and say, you're not allowed to trade with that country, you know? So that's what should have happened. And if they refuse to, then you take the company and say, okay, well, you're a state asset now. You don't exist anymore. And we're appropriating your retained earnings and everything. And all the executives are going to prison, you know, for trade.
So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off right there. I'm sorry. But again, I started to say this like 40 minutes ago, but then I get sucked back in. But I really enjoyed this conversation, but I actually got to get going now.
Yeah.
I have a couple things to do this morning, but I mean, if you have anything to finish up.
Oh, no. That's about it. That's actually about it. So people can go and follow you.
Yeah, I'll pimp myself out for a second, I guess.
Yeah.
So follow me on Twitter. I'm the Politicrat, of course. My YouTube channel, the Politicrat, again, I think it should be in your show notes. I think I saw it there. Currently just made it to 385 subscribers. So if I get to 400 within the next week, I think it was what I said. If I get to 400 within the next week, I'll make a video about how Shrek is about eminent domain. And so yeah, I'll make a video. I'll literally make a video on Shrek. So I've been meaning to do live streams again lately, but unfortunately I got a guideline strike. Yeah, no, it was, so I had somebody on, but it was from something several months ago. It was on the election, and nobody denied the results of the election. But there was a Trump supporter on who was wearing a MAGA hat. And so they said, oh yeah, somebody was questioning the election. And then like, I tried to appeal that, and I was like, well, I mean, first of all, that we purposefully and consciously made sure that nobody would say anything remotely like that, number one. Number two, I should not be held responsible for anything that anybody else but me says on there. And I even put that in a disclaimer at the bottom. But yeah, YouTube doesn't give a shit. YouTube doesn't give a shit though. But so yeah, I couldn't appeal it. So unfortunately I can't live stream for another 5 days. Or post videos. But I did recently about 4 days ago, I finished and uploaded a documentary that I've been working on for the past month or so. It's about 45 minutes long. It's about it's about Glub Pasha, very underrated general who fought, or who was commander of the Royal Arab Legion during the Second World War, back before the British Mandate of Palestine was dissolved. And it's also about like how he basically ended up taking the West Bank. And then it also goes on to a book that he wrote about the rise and fall of empires throughout history. I just basically ended up doing a summary of that. Apparently, people have liked it so far. They've liked the music, they've liked the narration. I don't know. I thought it was fun to make. But if that's something that interests you guys, it's my most recent video. Recommend checking it out. Really appreciate again if anybody who'd subscribe, support me, regardless of whether you agree with me or not. I still like to think that my opinions are at least worth hearing. But yeah, I've been rambling too much. But again, Kevin, thank you so much for having me on. I was and so we could finish this discussion.
Yeah, no, it was interesting. So with that, be sure to like and subscribe. I do daily premieres as well as daily live streams. Additionally, you can follow me over on Twitch, Minds, Gab, Twitter, Facebook, as well as other places in the links to the description below. Additionally, if you want to support me, you can go and check out my Ko-Fi, my PayPal, and my Patreon. Once we hit $500 a month on Patreon, I will be rolling out 2 daily premieres in addition to the daily live stream instead of 1. So with that, thank you to all the existing patrons and donors for your support. And I will see you in the next video. Take care, everybody, and stay based.